Chapter 165. After a moment, he turned around, carrying Xiao Hui in his arms, glanced at Wild Dog and said, "Let's go." Wild Dog could not wait to hear his words, hurriedly walked over, muttering, "Isn't this looking for trouble? For a monkey risking his life?" De Huang seemed to sense something, stood up and looked at Ghostly. Ghostly stretched out his hand and patted Big Yellow's head. He smiled and waved his left hand. A black stick flashing with dark green light appeared. It was the fire stick from back then. It carried his body straight into the blue sky. Wild Dog was speechless, grumbled, "Stinky brat, where do you think this is, even walking so arrogantly?" While he was grumbling, suddenly, De Huang roared loudly. Wild Dog was startled, quickly steered his magical weapon, and followed Ghostly. In front of the black bamboo forest, De Huang's lone figure barked loudly, kept on barking. Its wild roars reverberated in this mountain, barking incessantly until a fair hand stroked its head, gently said, "De Huang, what is it? Why did you come here today?" And still barking incessantly. De Huang seemed to be agitated and panting, turned to look at Tian Linger, who was now a young married woman, and then turned back, facing the sky, barking loudly. "Woof, woof, 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 woof." Tian Linger frowned, looked around, felt strange, and said, "What is it, De Huang, right? Where's Xiao Hui? Why isn't it with you?" Not knowing if De Huang understood what she said, but it still faced the sky, barking at the top of its voice. Tian Linger looked at the sky, but only saw the blue sky and white clouds. The blue sky was boundless. Indistinctly, there was a line of clouds streaking out from the layers of clouds, galloping across the firmament. It was a spectacular sight. For some reason, her heart suddenly felt perplexed. For a moment, she stared blankly. South of Qingyun Hill, thousands of miles away in a desolate place, there was a tall mountain called Majestic Fox Mountain. It was where the evil faction Ghost King Sect headquarters was located. In the past 10 years, the evil cult's power had become more and more prosperous with each passing day. Many masters had emerged, but the internal strife had become more and more tragic, and it was even more intense than the strife with the righteous faction. Ghost King Sect was originally one of the 4 big branches in the evil faction. For the past 10 years, the sect leader Ghost King had made great efforts to govern the sect. With great talent and bold strategy, he managed Ghost King Sect to become stronger day by day. Indistinctly, it looked like it was going to replace one Du clan as the #1 big branch in the evil faction. The current Ghost King Sect, other than the mysterious and unfathomable 4 great holy envoys who surfaced, there was also a mysterious figure, Mr. Ghost, who appeared around Ghost King. Usually one could only hear voices, but not see him. But the most eye-catching was the younger generation of Ghost King Sect, especially Ghostly, who was highly regarded by Ghost King. Ghost King even made an exception to promote him to vice sect leader, treating him as his own son. Now the whole world knew Ghostly would definitely be the next Ghost King Sect leader. In the evil faction, the internal strife was not only intense, but also unscrupulous. Not knowing how many people had tried to sow discord between Ghost King and this #1 war general under him, but all failed. And in the hearts of the extremely few who understood that part of the past, towards this strong and almost unbreakable relationship between these 2 people, they instead felt a faint sadness. The black veil gently covered her face. That mysterious black-attired lady, Yuji, right now quietly sat in the most important room in Ghost King's sect. The room was not very big, but it was very cold. The reason was because in the middle of the room, there was a crystal-clear white ice platform. Traces of cold air drifted up from the almost transparent ice platform. The world's most beautiful lady, wearing her beloved green dress, quietly lying on it, in the wisps of white cold air. Her face looked somewhat pale, as if also transparent, with a cold beauty. Her hands crossed before her. In her palms, as if already connected with her body, was a golden little bell, glimmering with a strange light, as if staring at this world. At this moment, a deep rumbling sound was heard from behind. The heavy stone door of this room was pushed open and then closed again. Footsteps were heard. Someone walked to Yuji's side. Yuji slowly raised her head. The people who were able to enter this room, even in the entire Ghost King sect, there would not be more than 4. Ghost Lee's somewhat pale face appeared before her eyes, her heart behind the veil, slightly palpitated, indistinctly remembered. Every time this man entered here, his face would turn paler and paler. Just that in the man's eyes, there was no UG at all. That beautiful lady peacefully lying there, right now, had completely occupied his body and mind. The stone chamber suddenly became very quiet, as if it was a deathly silence. UG gently stood up, stepped back, but her eyes were all on this man. His figure looked even more lonely. As for the terrible bloody stench that often appeared on him in the outside world, she could not feel it all in here. Also not knowing if only here was the only peaceful place for him. She took a last look at that man, walked out, carefully closed the stone door, and then was startled. Qing Long in white was standing beside. "What's the matter?" UG was silent for a moment, faintly said. Qing Long glanced at that stone door, said, "He is back." UG's veil moved as if nodding slightly, said, "Yes, he is talking to Bailu inside." Qing Long frowned, softly sighed. Actually, they all knew the so-called conversation was only ghostly muttering to himself. As for whether Bailu could hear it or not, that was another matter. Just that this matter was too sad. None of them were willing to talk about it. UG quietly stood for a while, suddenly said, "Every time Zhang Xiaofan returned, the first moment he will come here." Qing Long's countenance changed slightly, interrupted, "Third sister. He is now given the name Ghostly by Ghost King's sect head. I have told you many times, do not call him by this name." Yuji behind the black veil did not know what expression she had, but even her tone did not change, continued. "But sect head has not been here for a long time." Qing Long looked at her, finally heaved a long sigh, said, "These 10 years, the white hairs on sect head's temples increased a lot. You should be able to see it, right? It is not that he does not miss his only daughter, just that he hides the pain in his heart." UG was silent again, then seemed to recall something, raised her head and said, "The search for Black Shaman Tribe. How is it going?" Qing Long shook his head, said, "Black Shaman Tribe only appeared briefly 1,000 years ago. Now where are we going to search? We really have no clue at all." UG slowly turned and walked out. This stone room where Bailu was sleeping was naturally in a secluded place in Ghost King's sect. Rarely anyone came here. Right now, in the tunnel outside the stone room, there were only the two of them. Qing Long watched Yuji's back figure, suddenly spoke, "You better stay away from Ghostly." Yuji's body suddenly shook, immediately stopped. Her entire body seemed to have jumped up, but then slowly relaxed, turned around, stared at Qing Long through the veil, said word by word, "What do you mean?" Qing Long did not look at her anymore, turned to look at the sect in the stone room, faintly said, "I know you feel guilty towards Bayao, feel that you did not protect her well, but your private concern towards that man is already a little too much." UG did not speak, but this tunnel suddenly became even colder than that stone room. An invisible murderous intent seemed to be emanating from that black-attired lady. "Are you saying I actually have feelings for this young man?" She spat out word by word. Qing Long seemed not to feel the murderous intention in front of him. His expression did not change, only slowly said, "Third sister, I did not say that. I only wanted to remind you, because of Bai Yao, the relationship between Ghost King's sect leader and this man has always been very subtle. I have followed Ghost King's sect leader for many years. Know that even though he treats Ghostly as his own, but sometimes when he is sad for Bailu, I'm afraid he also has some hatred." Speaking till here, he turned back, looked deeply at Yuji, softly said, "Third sister, you better behave yourself." Yuji coldly snorted, coldly said, "Don't know what you were talking about." After speaking, she turned and walked away. Qing Long bitterly laughed, shook his head and sighed. In the stone room, Ghostly sat beside Bailu, staring at that beautiful yet slightly pale face, softly said, "I am back, Bailu. This time, I help your father to destroy another sect. It is that Blood Forger Hall that we knew at that time. You must still remember it, right?" Don't know why. When there was only one person left, I suddenly thought of you. Recall that we met here, I couldn't kill him. Bailu, will you blame me? A few days ago, I secretly avoided the guards, secretly went up to Big Bamboo Valley, conveniently brought Xiao Hui back. Have you seen Xiao Hui? It's the monkey that I raised since I was young. I went to Black Bamboo Forest, guess what I saw? So, that black bamboo that fell on the ground was still lying there. Bailu, do you still remember? It was the two of us, that bamboo that we sat on together. So, nothing has changed, but Bailu, he softly muttered, indistinctly choked with sobs, reverberated in this stone room. Chapter 166. White hair grew at the temples. Time flowed like water. Ghost King shifted his gaze away from the mirror-like water surface, sighed slightly, turned his head, smiled, and said, I have not looked in the mirror for a long time. Seeing it today, I see that there are more white hairs. Ghostly, who was standing behind him, was expressionless, faintly said, You are thinking too much. Right now, beside a small lake in majestic Fox Mountain, a stone pavilion was built in the middle of the lake. Only an old wooden bridge connected to the shore of the lake. Ghost King and Ghostly were standing in the stone pavilion in the middle of the lake. Ghost King clasped his hands behind his back, his expression calm, said, I heard during this trip to Kongsang Mountain, although Bloodforger Hall was subdued, but the only one who refused to surrender while Dog Taoist was protected by you. Is there such a matter? Ghostly glanced at Ghost King, saw that his face was calm. Not knowing what he was thinking, he slowly nodded and said, That's right. Ghost King smiled, turned and looked at the green jade like lake surface, faintly said, In the past when you led people to attack, you always killed until there was no one left. Why are you showing mercy to this person today? Ghostly was silent for a moment, said, Although Bloodforger Hall is declining now, but 800 years ago, it was after all a leading influential family, not an ordinary small sect. Ghost King stood there, did not show any reaction, not knowing if he was satisfied or dissatisfied with this explanation. After a long while, he suddenly said, Speaking of which, on the magical weapon in your hand, the sinister orb was originally Elder Blackheart's relic. I'm afraid you and Bloodforger Hall most likely have some relations. Ghostly slowly raised his eyes, looked at Ghost King. Ghost King just happened to turn and also looked at him. Both of their gazes clashed in the air. Ghostly's gaze was cold, Ghost King's instead, deep and calm. Ghost King suddenly smiled and said, Recently, it was rumored that in the Western Death Marsh, a rare treasure was born. Do you know about it? Ghostly nodded and said, Yes, I heard about it. Ghost King leisurely said, I heard that not only the good faction people are flocking over. Even Wandu clan, Hehuan sect's highly skilled people are also planning to intervene. As for Chongshan Hall, which is near the Death Marsh, they will not pass on the responsibility. He paused, looked at Ghostly and said, What do you think? Ghostly did not immediately speak, remained silent for a long time. Ghost King looked at him, seemed to be especially patient, without any anxious expression. After a long while, Ghostly unhurriedly said, This time we have subdued Bloodforger Hall. Other than the 4 great branches, the last more powerful branch has also been completely divided up. Ghost King's lips curled into a smile, nodded and said, Not bad. Ghostly said, In the evil sect, there's always been a tripod of mountains. The 4 great sects all want to swallow each other up. In the past, they were forced by the external forces of the righteous path to resist the external enemies together. Naturally, things are different now. And now, the sect's forces are gradually being arranged, and the next step will be a fierce battle between the 4 great sections. It's just that I don't know who will make the first move. Ghost King Palmstrike smiled and said, Good. Well said. Ghostly glanced at him, indifferently said, In these 10 years, not only have you passed me the 2 volumes of Tian Shu, you have also passed me everything you have learned in your entire life, strategies and decisions, one by one. If I cannot even see through this, wouldn't I be letting down your painstaking efforts? Ghost King smiled and looked at this young man before him, like looking at a perfect, precious object that he had personally created. In his joy, there was indistinctly a sense of pride. He was heard saying, That is also not entirely so. The things that I pass to you, it still depends on you to comprehend it yourself. The speed of your advancement these few years, it really greatly exceeded my expectations. I initially thought with your aptitude, you would at least need to train for more than 30 years. Unexpectedly, you only used 10 years, and you have already achieved great success. Rare, rare. Receiving such praise from Ghost King, Ghostly's face did not seem to have any smile, as if to him, this was not something worth being happy about. But Ghost King did not mind. These few years, this person in front of him had changed from the initial Zhang Xiao fan to the current Ghostly. His past temperament had long turned upside down. Other than his appearance, there was almost no shadow of the past him. He paused and said, "Then from what you see, in our holy sect, since the 4 great branches cannot avoid a fight, do you think we should make the first move, or wait quietly?" This time Ghostly did not hesitate, and immediately said, "Strike first to gain the initiative." Ghost King stared at him and said, "Good. Then which branch do you think we should deal with first?" Ghostly, Changshan Hall. Ghost King frowned, but his eyes were already filled with admiration, said, "Why?" Ghostly said, "Currently Ghost King's sect and Wandu clan are the strongest. Hehuan's sect and Changshan Hall slightly weaker." Hehuan's sect had always been low profile, but although Changshan Hall Yuyang's skills are high, he is arrogant and conceited. He had always regarded himself as the host of the good and evil faction battle at Qingyun Hill, and thought that he was the only one in the evil faction. Such an idiot. If not him, who else? Ghost King smiled and said, "That's right. Well said. Then if you're the host, how should we proceed?" Ghostly pondered for a moment and said, "This is a good opportunity. A rare treasure will be born in the Death Marsh. Yuyangzi will definitely regard it as his own and will not allow outsiders to dip their hands in it. But the good faction will swarm over. We can wait for Changshan Hall and the good faction to fight, and after both sides are injured, then we will secretly contact Wandu clan and Hehuan's sect to attack together. This kind of matter of hitting them when they are down, they will definitely not decline. This way the battle will definitely be a success." Ghost King looked at him and did not speak. Ghostly slowly raised his head and looked at Ghost King, faintly said, "What?" Ghost King seemed to be lost in thought as he looked at him. After a moment he came to his senses and slowly retracted his gaze, as if sighing in the depths of his heart, faintly said, "Nothing. What you said and what I am thinking are almost the same." Ghostly did not speak. Ghost King smiled indifferently and said, "Rest for another 2 days, and then go to the Death Marsh." While speaking, he took out a sealed letter from his bosom and passed it to Ghostly, said, "The specific arrangements I have already written clearly in this letter. After reaching the Great Marsh, all the Ghost King's sect people will be at your disposal." Ghostly slowly took the letter and kept it in his bosom, was silent for a moment, nodded to Ghost King, and then turned to leave. But he had only walked a few steps when suddenly Ghost King behind him said, "There's one more thing." Ghostly stopped. Ghost King's voice was heard unhurriedly, said, "When you are talking to me, how do you address our holy sect? Or is it evil sect?" Ghostly was silent for a long time. Coldly said, "I have been in the sect for 10 years. This place is filled with bloody battles all day long, mutual deceit, scheming and plotting against each other all the time. How can it be worthy of the word holy?" Ghost King laughed and then said, "Oh, so that good faction that you came from, how is it?" Ghostly's body seemed to tremble slightly. After a moment, he was heard saying, "The evil deeds that the good faction people do are not any worse than the evil sect people." Ghost King looked at him with interest, said, "Then that is also not, in your heart, what do you think is good?" Ghostly did not answer, was silent for a long time, raised his head, and looked at the sky. Blue sky, white clouds. "I don't know," he quietly said, as if he was talking to himself. That lonely and desolate figure from the back gradually went further away. The smile on Ghost King's face also slowly disappeared. In his deep eyes, there seemed to be a mysterious light, sparkling incessantly. Not knowing what he was thinking in his heart, at this moment a voice was heard from the other side, said, "Sect head." Ghost King interrupted his words, said, "Qing Long, come up." "Yes." Qing Long walked over from the wooden bridge, followed Ghost King's gaze, and looked far away, said, "Just now Vice Sect Head was also here." Ghost King nodded and said, "What's the matter?" Qing Long said, "That old monster from Wandu clan sent someone over secretly again. Ask Sect Head, when will you send people into the Death Marsh so that everyone can work together?" Ghost King sneered and said, "You reply them. 3 days later, Ghost King Sect, Wandu clan, Hehuan Sect will enter the marsh together." Qing Long nodded and said, "All right." Ghost King muttered to himself for a while, suddenly seemed to have thought of something, turned and said to Qing Long, "Qing Long, what do you think of Ghostly?" Qing Long was surprised, looked up at Ghost King, saw that Ghost King's brows were calm, but his eyes were deep. He felt an inexplicable chill in his heart. For a moment, he forgot to reply. Ghost King smiled and said, "What is it?" Qing Long was startled and then muttered to himself. His expression was hesitant. Ghost King saw it, smiled and said, "Qing Long, you and I have known each other for many years. Feel free to speak your mind." Qing Long shook his head with a wry smile and then said, "Let's put it this way. When I was his age, my skills were not as high as him, not as shrewd as him." Speaking till here, he suddenly stopped. Ghost King frowned and said, "What is it? What else is there? Say it." Qing Long hesitated for a moment, looked at Ghost King and said, "Not as ruthless as him." Ghost King glanced at him but did not say anything, slowly turned around and looked at the mirror-like lake surface. Qing Long behind him slowly said, "These few years, especially the last 2 years, Ghostly's way of doing things has become more and more intense and vicious, killing at every turn, even more ruthless and merciless in the power struggle. And among our Ghost King sect's younger generation, the more outstanding talents like Killing Monk, Yin Hui, etc., are all gathered under him." Ghost King indifferently said, "You think this is not good?" Qing Long slowly shook his head and said, "Not really, just that at that time he... How did he become like this now?" Ghost King was silent for a while, suddenly said, "Actually, I also misjudged him at that time." Qing Long was shocked and said, "Sect Head, what did you say?" Ghost King said, "When I imparted him the second volume of Tian Shu, I thought with his aptitude, he would need at least 30 years to succeed, but in these 10 years, especially the last 5 years, Ghost Lee's cultivation advanced by leaps and bounds. It can be said to be 1,000 miles in a day. I'm afraid it is his inner beauty that even I could not tell." Speaking till here, his eyes, which had his back facing Qing Long, seemed to flash past an unknown cold glint, but his tone did not change at all. His character is persevering and persistent, tenacious and indomitable. It is really beneficial to his cultivation, but I still suspect. I'm afraid there are other reasons. Qing Long frowned and said, "Don't tell me he still has some secrets?" Ghost King shook his head and said, "You should know that he possesses Qing Yun sect Taoism, true way, and Tian Yin Temple great Brahmin wisdom, right?" Qing Long nodded and said, "That's right." Ghost King unhurriedly said, "With my secret observation, not only is Tian Shu true way of her holy sect, even Qing Yin sects Tai Chi Xian Qing way and Buddhism great Brahmin wisdom true way, at the same time also advanced by leaps and bounds. These 3 true ways, don't tell me there is a miraculous effect of complementing each other." Chapter 167. He turned and smiled at Qing Long, said, "With his current level of cultivation, plus that strange magical weapon Soul Devourer in his hands, even if you have the ring of universe clear light, I'm afraid you only have 50% chance of winning." Qing Long smiled and said, "I'm old, can't compete with the young." Ghost King suddenly laughed, patted his shoulder and said, "How can there be such a thing?" He smiled and unhurriedly said, "At that time I could see that this young man was definitely not an ordinary person, and now his achievements are even beyond my expectations. If Ghost King sect has this person to take over, their future will definitely be limitless." Just that. He clasped his hands behind his back, but suddenly stopped talking, walked to the pavilion, and gazed out. Qing Long quietly stood beside, looked at Ghost King. That body that held great power, right now suddenly indistinctly had a sense of desolation, silently conveying those unspoken words. Bai Yao, 3 days later, Ghostly left majestic Fox Mountain and headed west. At the same time, he also brought along Xiao Hui. Other than that, Wild Dog Taoist also followed beside him. Initially, Wild Dog Taoist did not want to go to the Death Marsh, that dangerous place, but Ghostly only indifferently said, "After I leave, I guarantee that majestic Fox Mountain here is 100 times more dangerous than that marsh. Do you believe me?" Once the words were spoken, Wild Dog Taoist immediately turned pale. His words were still unyielding, but his feet had already followed. Divine land vast, vast and boundless. Naturally, Central Plains was the most affluent. And outside of Central Plains, the north was a world of ice and snow. The bitter, cold tundra of the extreme north, uninhabited. The east was the vast and boundless ocean. As for the south, outside of Central Plains, there were 10,000 great mountains, towering at the border, unending. There were barren mountains and unruly rivers, countless miasma and poisonous creatures. Legend said that there were even strange barbarians, eating raw meat and drinking blood, incomparably savage. And in the west of Divine Land, Vast Land, there were two fierce lands. In the northwest direction, there was an endless desolate desert. Known as Savage Lands, there had not been rain for hundreds of years. The weather extremely dry. Occasionally there were some oases, but most of them were occupied by ferocious beasts. Naturally, if ordinary people entered, it would only be a road to death. And in legend, in the depths of Savage Lands, there was a grand temple, the birthplace of the evil sect. As for the southwest, it was the enormous, deathly swamp that everyone's face would change color at the mention of it. The climate here was the complete opposite of that of the wilderness. In a year, it rained for 7 or 8 days out of 10. All kinds of strange plants flourished here. This kind of cold and damp place had always been the dwelling place of the world's most venomous beasts and insects. Furthermore, the poisonous gas that was unique to this place would rise from the rotten mud of the swamp every time it rained. If a person breathed it in and didn't have an appropriate antidote, the poison would attack their heart and kill them within half a minute. In addition, the animal corpses, trees, and flowers that had been soaked in the rain for thousands of years had turned this place into a dangerous place. If one were to take a wrong step, they would be sucked into the bottomless swamp, never to see the light of day, and die a tragic death. Normally, no one would come to such a dangerous place. But not long ago, there was suddenly a rumor in the world that in the western swamp of death, an enormous golden light pillar suddenly soared up and shot straight into the sky, ceaselessly for a day and night. Even in the middle of the night, it illuminated the sky as bright as day. 3 days later, the golden light gradually dispersed, and from then on, within the swamp of death, there seemed to always be a loud, strange, whistling sound faintly heard, causing those people who live at the edge of the swamp of death to be extremely terrified. Once this news spread, it immediately shook the world. From the perspective of cultivators, spiritual objects and divine weapons had always had their own spirituality. Such an enormous golden light was naturally the omen of the birth of a rare treasure, summoning the fated one to come forth. And from this golden light pillar, the miraculousness of this rare treasure was really not to be underestimated. For a time, the world was shaken, and the experts of both good and evil gathered. And under that chaos on the surface, there was an unknown undercurrent, surging and flowing. Half a day's journey from the swamp of death to the east, there was a desolate and withered little village called Great King Village, because the villagers in the village believe in a certain mysterious deity called Great King. But this deity had never been very efficacious. He didn't bless the villagers to become rich, nor did he bless them with a bountiful harvest, nor did he bless them with food and clothing. Actually, thinking about it, living at the edge of the swamp of death from time to time, a strange beast would suddenly appear from nowhere, or a poisonous insect would run out. Killing the livestock was a small matter, but every year, the number of people who died from this was not small. Nowadays, those who had a bit of ability had already left this godforsaken place and ran to the Central Plains. Those who stayed here were mostly people who did not have any vitality. But in these few days, Great King Village suddenly became lively, and those who came and went were all cultivators. Although Great King Village was not the only entrance into the Swamp of Death, but it was the nearest inhabited place to the Swamp of Death. Many people came here, and before entering the Swamp of Death, they bought some dry rations and clean water. After a few days, it actually made the villagers of Great King Village earn a little money and became a little livelier. And at the same time, because this was the place closest to the Swamp of Death, so regarding the golden light pillar and the strange whistling sound, it was also the villagers here who first discovered it, and from there it spread out. Hence there were also quite a number of people who came here to inquire about the news. Just that after the number of people increased, naturally there were good and evil. After a few days, in this small place like Great King Village, who knew how many fights had already happened? Some unlucky fellows, before even entering the Swamp of Death, had already died inexplicably here. It was really unjust. Without further ado, this day, Ghostly and Wild Dog also arrived at Great King Village. Standing at the village entrance, they saw people coming and going in the village. It was actually quite lively, a stark contrast to the usual lifeless scene. Walking into the village, Wild Dog looked around, frowning as he muttered something. The monkey Xiao Hui, for the first time these few days, saw so many people. It was excited, lying on Ghostly's shoulder, and called out. Ghostly patted Xiao Hui, glanced at Wild Dog, and said, "What are you doing?" Wild Dog Taoist snapped and said, "I am looking for an inn. After walking for so long, shouldn't I find a place to rest properly? This is really a godforsaken place. Even an inn is so hard to find." Ghostly indifferently said, "Why, you think there is an inn here?" Wild Dog was shocked and said, "What?" Ghostly turned and looked at the passers-by on the streets, saw that most of them were well-dressed. Obviously, they were not people who lived a hard life in Great King Village. He said, "Have you been here before?" Wild Dog snorted and said, "Who has nothing better to do to come to this godforsaken place?" Ghostly glanced at him and said, "That's right. There are no outsiders here, and the local villagers are also poor. What is the use of an inn?" Wild Dog was speechless, a look of bitterness on his dog face. At this moment, suddenly a shout was heard from the main street ahead. Someone loudly said, "Foreseeing 50 years of future, able to foresee 300 years of fortune, iron mouth divine physiognomy, pin to judge yin and yang, to know the future, come and see a physiognomy." Ghostly and Wild Dog were stunned for a moment and looked towards the source of the voice, at the side of the main street. A worn-out wooden table was placed, beside it was a bamboo pole, and on it was a piece of canvas, written with the words "Immortal Guide." Beside the bamboo pole, an old man with an extraordinary bearing shouted loudly. The voice just now was from him, and beside him there was a drowsy young lady, her looks rather pretty, right now lying on the side of the table, a helpless expression on her face. Needless to say, these two people were Tanis Ka and Xiao Huan. Tanis Ka roamed the world with Xiao Huan. His ability was not high, but he liked to go to bustling places. Some time ago, he heard the rumors of the Death Marsh. Immediately ignoring Xiao Huan's objection, he pulled her to this Great King Village. Right now, using Tanis Ka's words, his travel expenses were exhausted. A hero at the end of his road, he had no choice but to do a physiognomy on the street. Just while he was shouting, towards the end, his voice gradually changed. "All passing customers, I have received the teachings of the founder, can counter the world's poison. In today's Death Marsh, the marsh gas is extremely poisonous. As long as you all have the fragrance sachet that I am selling, you will definitely be immune to all poisons, indestructible." Xiao Huan quietly sighed, sitting here for a few hours, calling Grandpa enthusiastically, but in fact, not even one fragrance sachet was sold. The locals believed that they could not afford. Tanis Ka set a black-hearted high price. But the outsiders were all cultivators. All of them were knowledgeable. When they glanced over, the word liar was written on it. Luckily, the righteous heroes were busy fighting for the treasures and did not care about this fortune-teller. Otherwise, if any disciple of the master suddenly became hot-blooded and wanted to get rid of evil for the people, they would be in serious trouble. Seeing Tanis Ka was still shouting energetically, Xiao Huan was a little impatient. She stood up and was about to call Grandpa. Suddenly her vision blurred. A person was standing in front of the wooden table. It was a young man, wearing a light blue robe, delicate features, just that his face looked a little pale. "Miss, I want to have a physiognomy." That young man had a faint smile on his lips, calmly said. Xiao Huan frowned, looked at him. At this time Tanis Ka also noticed the situation here, quickly walked back. with a face full of smiles, said, "Customer, what do you want to see? Fortune or marriage? How do you want to see? Physiognomy, palm reading, or word reading?" That young man pondered for a moment, said, "I also want to enter this dead marsh. Help me to have a look at my fortune." Tanaka laughed and said, "No problem, no problem. Come, customer, please have a seat. First let me say, we're the direct disciple of founder, peerless in physiognomy, so one look will cost 10 silvers. That young man was surprised, said, "So expensive?" Tanaka smiled and did not answer. That young man's eyes turned, looked at Xiao Huan, smiled and said, "All right, 10 silvers it is. How about this? You first help me to have a word reading." Xiao Huan glanced at him, took a piece of white paper from the side, handed over a thin brush, said, "Then customer, please write a word on." Unexpectedly, that young man took the brush, smiled and said, "No need. I will write my name. You help me to have a look at my name's fortune." While speaking, he wrote 3 words on the white paper and passed it to Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan was startled, took it and looked at the white paper, heard that young man smiled and said, "I am Qin Huiyan." Chapter 168. Xiao Huan frowned slightly. Her eyes gradually brightened, carefully looked at the white paper in her hand. The 3-word Qin Huiyan, written neatly and neatly. The strokes were straight and smooth. The corners were reserved and smooth. A rather beautiful handwriting. Xiao Huan blinked her eyes, suddenly smiled and said, "This customer, your name has yin. It is the yang power of the twin fires, but in the middle is suppressed by the word, the twists and turns of the mountain road. It is in soft, and the word Qin resides in the west. It will be beneficial for you to go to the western in cold land." She gently placed the white paper on the table, looked at Qin Huiyan and said, "The western death marsh is the in damp land. Your luck will definitely not be bad this time." A trace of smile appeared on Qin Huiyan's face. His young but pale face seemed to have some color, nodded and said, "Thank you, miss. Here are 10 taels of silver. Please keep it well." While speaking, he took out 10 taels of fine silver and placed it on the table. Xiao Huan looked but did not move. Tanaka instead stretched his hand over and kept the silver, laughed and said, "Thank you, customer." Qin Huiyan smiled, but did not have the intention to leave. Instead, he took out another 10 taels of silver and placed it on the table. Tanaka was surprised, said, "Customer, this is..." Qin Huiyan calmly said, "I still have a friend. He is also going to that death marsh. I will have to trouble miss to also read a word for him." Xiao Huan was surprised. Qin Huiyan had already taken the paper and pen, wrote 2 words on it, passed it to Xiao Huan, smiled and said, "He is called Ghostly." The bustling street, the surrounding noises suddenly quietened down. Some people quietly retreated, some people quietly approached. At the street corners, on the roofs, figures indistinctly appeared. Although it was daytime here, it suddenly became somewhat cold. The people present naturally also felt this inexplicable change. Tanaka frowned slightly, looked around. Before he could say anything, Xiao Huan had already pushed the white paper over, indifferently said, "Sorry, customer, in the art of word reading, the person must write it personally, then it can be read." Qin Huiyan was not angry, only smiled and said, "Is that so?" Looking at him, he did not have the intention to leave and was still standing in front of the table. Xiao Huan's countenance changed, and at this moment, a hand suddenly stretched over from the side, wrote ghostly 2 words on the paper, and then someone indifferently said, "Miss, please take a look at these 2 words." Xiao Huan turned and looked at him. In the blink of an eye, it seemed like 10 years had passed. Xiao Hui crouched on his shoulder, its quick-witted eyes rolling around, and between his brows, nothing seemed to have changed, still the same as that year. On the street, there was a deathly silence. In the dark and the light surrounding these 2 young men, there seemed to be 2 groups of forces monitoring each other and confronting each other. Xiao Huan was stunned for a long time, took the piece of paper. "Ghostly," she recited softly. These 2 words were far from being as beautiful as Qin Huiyan's. The strokes were dignified, clumsy, and not skillful, but every stroke was extremely clear. The strength in the strokes seemed to be restrained, but at the end of every stroke, it seemed to be unable to be suppressed, revealing some sharpness, an air of pride, assaulted one's senses. Xiao Huan's eyes at the moment also seemed to become brighter. After a moment, she put down the white paper, paused for a moment, and then said, "This customer, what do you want to ask?" Xiao Hui suddenly jumped down from Ghost Li's shoulder, landed on the table, picked up that brush, and curiously played with it. Ghost Li glanced at Xiao Hui and said, "I also want to make a trip to this death marsh. Would like to ask Miss to take a look at my fortune." Xiao Huan looked at him, suddenly laughed, and said, "Everyone has a soul. After death, the soul does not disperse. Most of them are eaten spirits and ghost bodies, feared by the people. For customer to choose such a mournful name. Obviously, you do not believe in ghosts and deities. Why do you need to ask me?" Ghostly silently looked at her, did not speak, but Qin Huiyin suddenly laughed and said, "Wrong, wrong. Miss is wrong." Xiao Huan was stunned by his words, said, "What wrong did I do?" Qin Huiyin's eyes had a faint brilliance, facing Xiao Huan, but the corner of his eyes was sweeping towards Ghostly, smiled and said, "In the ancient times, Heaven Vidyaraja split heaven and earth. Nether Radiant Saint Mother created all living beings. This is an everlasting fact. How can we not believe it?" In the evil sect, they had always revered the two saints, which were Heaven Vidyaraja and Nether Radiant Saint Mother. The ordinary sect members had always believed in them, but to the good faction people, naturally it was a crooked way. Just that this Qin Huiyin said it indifferently, but it seemed like he was interrogating something. Behind him, the invisible pressure on the main street. Following the moment, he turned his head, suddenly rose. Ghostly slowly turned around. Facing him, Qin Huiyin also turned around at the same time. Two young people, on this simple and crude main street, coldly looked at each other. The surroundings were quiet. Zhou Yixian suddenly felt a buzzing sound in his head, a wave of dizziness. Even his breathing involuntarily became nervous. He secretly looked around. After a moment, he discovered many people who looked like they had nothing to do with this place, were either listening or peeking. Some were even staring directly at this place, their hands holding magical weapons, looking like they were ready to go on a killing spree anytime. Ghost Li's pupils contracted slightly. His voice also turned deep, said, "Du Gongzi?" The smile on Qin Huiyin's face also gradually disappeared. Looking solemn, but his voice was still calm, said, "Shui Gongzi." Pa! Suddenly, a low and deep voice suddenly sounded in the field. The two groups of people who were secretly confronting each other on the street were suddenly shocked. The originally tense scene was like a sharp whistle in the silence and was about to explode. Even on Ghost Li and Qin Huiyin's calm faces, the corners of their eyes seemed to twitch slightly. A slightly panicked, embarrassed voice rang out, "No, nothing. I did not do it on purpose." Everyone looked over. In his nervousness, Zhou Yixian accidentally dropped the money that he had just received, making a muffled sound. Xiao Huan's forehead was covered in sweat. She angrily stared at him. Zhou Yixian's face turned red, embarrassed and speechless, but in his heart, he was shaken. In these 10 years, the evil sect's power flourished greatly. The younger generation also produced quite a number of talented youths, among which the most outstanding three, some busybodies called them Three Gongzi, namely, one Du Clan Qin Huiyin, called Du Gongzi, Ghost King sect Ghostly, called Shui Gongzi. The remaining one was He Huan's sect Jin Pinger, called Miao Gongzi. Among the evil sect's 4 main branches, only Chang Shun Hall's younger generation did not have anyone ranked above them, lacking successors. These few years, these 3 young people in the evil sect could be said to be able to call the wind and summon the rain. At such a young age, they had already grasped the heavy power of their own sect. Wherever they went, there would be a reign of terror from time to time. Fights and bloody battles were unavoidable, but among them, they had never met before. Someone once said, until the day when these 3 finally meet face to face, most likely it would also be the time when the evil sect's 4 main branches' real big fight would begin. And at this moment, the evil sect's 2 most powerful branches, one Du Clan and Ghost King sect, were facing each other in the gazes of these 2 young people. The atmosphere in the scene was unusually quiet and tense. Zhou Yixian felt that he was almost suffocating. He had the intention to secretly pack up with Xiao Huan and slip away, but right now, no matter what, he did not dare to act rashly. Otherwise, these 2 young people were notorious fiends. He absolutely could not afford to offend them. And at this moment, Qin Huiyin suddenly smiled and said, "Ghostly brother, junior brother has long admired your great name. Today, I finally have the fortune to meet you. It is really the fortune of 3 lifetimes." His smile immediately eased the tense atmosphere. Zhou Yixian almost immediately felt that the invisible pressure that was constantly suppressing him from all directions began to slowly recede with his smile. Although Ghostly did not smile, but the expression on his face also eased in both of their hearts. Maybe both of them knew that now was after all not the time for them to fight. Qin brother is too kind. Qin Huiyin, as if the confrontation just now did not happen, smiled and said, "With Ghostly brother's presence here, I believe that rare treasure in the Death Marsh will definitely not be able to escape from brother's hands." Ghostly looked deeply at him, suddenly said, "The world is so big. Ghostly is a lowly person. If God of Poison Senior wants this thing, as long as he Senior says the word, definitely no one will dare to snatch it." Qin Huiyin's countenance changed slightly, immediately said, "My teacher has long stopped caring about worldly affairs. Moreover, if there's an owner, it should be Chang Shunhao Yuyangzi Sr., who manages this place." Ghostly looked at him, slowly nodded his head, and said, "Qin brother is right." Both of them looked at each other and suddenly smiled. Qin Huiyin cupped his hands, turned around and clasped his hands behind his back and left, looking at his graceful figure. If one did not know his identity, one would think that he was a worldly, elegant gentleman. As his figure walked further and further away, on the originally bustling main street, the pedestrians who were just walking to and fro suddenly either left or dispersed. In a short while, half of the crowd had disappeared. Ghostly slowly turned his head. His eyes landed on Xiao Huan, who was standing beside. Xiao Huan's bright eyes did not show any signs of fear, looked back at him. Ghostly looked at her for a long while, and then looked at Zhou Yixian. Finally his eyes returned to Xiao Huan. Suddenly a faint smile floated on his lips, quietly said, "You have grown up." Chapter 169. That long-awaited smile suddenly appeared, like a wisp of spring breeze melting some ice and snow. But it was only for a moment. When Xiao Huan regained her senses, Ghostly had already carried the monkey Xiao Hui, headed west. The surrounding people, some following from afar, some following close, gradually half of them also dispersed. For some reason, Xiao Huan suddenly felt an inexplicable perplexity, silently looked at that young man's back, saw that there seemed to be a crowd crowding around him, but no one dared to come near, other than that monkey on his shoulder. Even that figure seemed to have some desolation. She quietly watched, lost in thought. "Hey, little girl!" Suddenly a loud shout was heard beside her. Xiao Huan and Taniska, who was tidying up, were shocked, turned to look. It was a Taoist with a strange appearance, a face like a dog, standing in front of them, said, "Little girl, you look like you're very good at fortune-telling. Also help your wild dog, Taoist master fortune-telling." Xiao Huan glanced at him, said, "Oh, what does customer want to fortune-tell? Physiognomy or word reading?" Wild Dog was about to speak when suddenly a key sound was heard from the side. Everyone was stunned. It was the monkey Xiao Hui. For some reason, actually ran back and in 2 or 3 steps scuttled to the side of the fortune-telling stall, a pair of eyes rolling around, looking at the 3 of them. Wild Dog stared at Xiao Hui, angrily said, "What are you rushing for? Don't tell me your Taoist master will eat this little girl." After speaking, he turned his head and spoke to Xiao Huan. "I am illiterate. Just read my physiognomy." Xiao Huan smiled and said, "Customer, what do you want to ask?" Wild Dog was stunned for a moment, frowned and thought, said, I am carrying a heavy burden. Can you see if I will make a great contribution in the future?" Xiao Huan stared at his face for a long time, said, "Your face is unique, 1 in a million, but it is not the face that can make a great contribution. The 3 lines on your forehead have long deepened, but push the merit lines to one side, and the merit lines are cut off from the middle. The continuation is weak." She smiled and said, "If there is no benefactor to help, it will be difficult for you to achieve anything in this life." Xiao Huan said it casually, but Wild Dog Taoist's face turned ashen, his expression extremely ugly. At this moment Taniska came up, stretched out his hand and said, "Customer, many thanks for the 10 silvers." Wild Dog Taoist stared, angrily said, "Hey, this woman is talking nonsense. Your family's wild dog Taoist has always been blessed with great life. What difficult achievements, still dare to ask me for money, looking for death." Tanis Isian was startled, but Xiaohuan's expression did not change. Wild Dog was about to turn around and renege on the debt, when suddenly the monkey, Xiao Hui, who had been crouching at the side, called out twice, suddenly jumped up and jumped onto Wild Dog's body. Wild Dog Taoist was immediately shocked, waved his hands and feet, angrily said, "Damn monkey. What are you doing?" Before he finished, Xiao Hui had already jumped away while he was waving his hand. This time it landed on the table in front of Xiao Huan. Grinned at Xiao Huan, he laughing. Xiao Huan saw that the monkey was extremely adorable. Her face could not help but revealed a smile and said, "Little monkey, what are you doing?" Xiao Hui's left hand scratched its head, its eyeballs rolled, and then stretched out its right hand from behind, spread it out in front of Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan took a look and could not help but was stunned. In the monkey's hand, there was an ingot of fine silver. Looking at its size, it was most likely more than 30 silvers. Wild Dog Taoist, who was behind, was also shocked, reached into his bosom and immediately raged. "Bastard, actually dare to steal your family's Taoist master's money. Rebel, rebel, rebel." Following which a gray light flashed in his hand. The Feng magical weapon shone out. He raised his hand and was about to strike Xiao Hui's head. Xiao Huan's countenance changed. Her left hand retracted into her sleeve and was about to do something, but the monkey Xiao Hui instead squeaked at Wild Dog, jumping up and down on the table, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Looking at its demeanor, it seemed even more arrogant than Wild Dog Taoist. Wild Dog Taoist's hand was in midair when he suddenly seemed to recall something. After several reluctantly, he still put down the magical weapon. In an evil voice said, "Fine, consider yourself ruthless. One day in the future, I will make you, this bastard, and that brat come and beg me." After speaking, he turned and walked away. The monkey Xiao Hui jumped up high, turned its head and laughed at Xiao Huan. The more Xiao Huan looked, the more she liked it. She could not help but stretched out her hand to stroke Xiao Hui's head, softly laughed, and said, "Thank you, little monkey." Xiao Hui beamed with joy, using its monkey claws to stroke its head. Even its tail sometimes straightened and swayed, sometimes curled up. Tanis Ka kept the silver that fell on the table. He was also very happy, walked over and stretched out his hand to stroke Xiao Hui's head. His mouth said, "Hee, good monkey, Z." Unexpectedly, Xiao Hui suddenly screamed, opened its mouth and bit. If not for Tanis Ka retracting his hand quickly, he would have been bitten by it. Tanis Ka was stunned for a moment, saw Xiao Huan smiling happily, stroking Xiao Hui's head. One human and one monkey extremely harmonious. For some reason they were treating him like this. He felt embarrassed. The more Xiao Huan looked, the more she felt Xiao Hui was adorable. Couldn't help but hug Xiao Hui in her arms. Played with Xiao Hui. Tanis Ka started to pack his things. His mouth was full of dissatisfaction. Shook his head and sighed. "AI, what kind of world is this now? Even monkeys are so perverted." Xiao Huan blushed, stared at her grandfather, angrily said, "Grandfather, what did you say?" Tanis Ka smiled awkwardly, did not dare to speak, but turned his head, still pretending to be a worried saint. "AI, the moral degeneration of the world. The moral degeneration of the world." Xiao Huan couldn't be bothered with him anymore, turned her head and thought for a while, walked to the side, and took out a small package wrapped in paper from her bag. Gently opened it. Inside were 2 sticks of bright and sparkling candied haws. A wisp of sweet fragrance entered her nose. Xiao Huan picked up a skewer and passed it to Xiao Hui in her bosom. Xiao Hui took it, but left Xiao Huan's body and jumped back onto the table, its eyes rolling around, looking at the candied haws in its hand. In the end, it carefully put it into its mouth and used its tongue to lick it. Xiao Huan lay on the side of the table, looked at it with a smile, said, "Sweet, right, very tasty." The little gray monkey blinked its eyes, immediately nodded, holding the candied haws in its hand, excitedly jumped up and down on the table. After a while it jumped off the table, waved the candied haws in its hand toward Xiao Huan, and then ran towards the far end of the street, very quickly disappearing into the distance. Xiao Huan looked at its figure gradually disappearing, smiled, and shook her head. In her heart she liked this extremely clever monkey. A pity it was not hers. She felt some regret. Turning her head, she found Tanizka was also looking at the direction of the monkey Xiao Hui. Lost in thought, his mouth seemed to be mumbling something. She couldn't help but said, "Grandfather, it is only a little monkey. You're already so old, still holding a grudge. Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by others?" Xiao Huan snorted, said, "What do you know, I just suddenly thought. This monkey is very powerful. Can actually steal silver from wild dog Taoist, this kind of cultivation master, without anyone knowing. If I also raise a monkey like this, won't I be able to steal however much silver I want?" Xiao Huan was speechless, angrily said, "Grandfather." Tanizka regained his senses, smiled awkwardly, did not dare to reply, buried his head to pack up. Xiao Huan glared at him, turned around, and packed her bag. When she was wrapping up the remaining stick of candied haws, suddenly she heard a clear and melodious laughter from the side. Someone said, "How come you still like candied haws so much after not seeing each other for 3 years?" Xiao Huan was surprised, looked up, saw a young lady, dressed in light yellow clothes, oval face, eyebrows like a painting, her eyes filled with charm. The first glance was clear and elegant. The second glance was flirtatious, captivating the world. Xiao Huan was pleasantly surprised, laughed out, immediately put down the things in her hands, pulled the lady's hand, smiled and said, "Sister, why is it you?" That lady was obviously very familiar with Xiao Huan, stretched out her hand to pinch Xiao Huan's fair face, smiled and said, 3 years, sister, you're getting more and more beautiful. Even I can't help but be tempted." Xiao Huan blushed, scolded, "Not serious. Why are you here?" That lady smiled, did not reply, instead looked towards the west, which was where Qin Huiyin and Ghostly were heading towards. Xiao Huan was stunned, said, "You also want to go into the Death Marsh?" That lady blinked her eyes. The next moment, a captivating, pretty smile appeared, said, "Sister, do you want to go in and watch the show?" Xiao Huan frowned slightly, said, "But inside that place is really—" That lady laughed lightly, said, "What are you afraid of? With me around, will I let anyone bully you? Even if you don't mind, my heart will ache." Xiao Huan rolled her eyes at her, but couldn't help but laughed out, said, "All right, anyway, we haven't seen each other for a long time. I also want to chat more with sister." Speaking, she turned to Tanizka and said, "Grandpa, are you going?" Tanizka obviously knew this lady's identity, expected that with her around, there would be no problems. He smiled and said, "Go, of course I will go." That lady smiled, said to Xiao Huan, "Sister, then let's go." While speaking, she hugged Xiao Huan's shoulder, whispered something in her ear. Xiao Huan giggled. The two of them slowly walked over, left the big pile of things for Tanizka to tidy up. Tanizka was stunned, shook his head and sighed. While tidying up, he bitterly lamented the degeneration of public morals. People did not respect the elderly. Chapter 170. The sky was overcast and looked very low. There were gusts of wind blowing from nowhere. When it brushed past the body, it made one feel chilly. Beside a patch of swamp overgrown with weeds, there was an indistinct small path in the woods, extending into the swamp. Zheng Shu and the group of Qin Yin sect disciples stood at the entrance of the death swamp, peering in, only to see the vast expanse. Everywhere was lush water plants. Occasionally a lone tree stood erect among them. There was a faint rotting smell in the air, and above the swamp, a thin mist like gray muslin floated, making one only able to see the nearby area, making it even more mysterious. Zheng Shu frowned, turned around. Qin Yin sect with Xiao Yikai as the leader of the 13 younger generation disciples. Their faces were solemn. Since ancient times, the Death Swamp had the infamy of it's hard to get out once you enter. Nobody knew what kind of ferocious things were in there. This time the Qin Yin sect disciples came from the west. Xiao Yikai's identity and cultivation indistinctly became the leader of the group. Right now he stared into the depths of the Death Swamp for a long time. Without batting an eyelid, said to the crowd, "Yesterday, Funxiang Valley Li Sun's senior brother sent me a letter," in the words. He very politely expressed that he wants to join hands with us Qin Yun sect to eradicate the evildoers. So they've already entered this death swamp. There was a commotion behind him. Only Lu Sweki looked indifferent, stood beside her senior sister Wenmin, staring into the death swamp, quietly. And on the other side, Lin Jingyu, who was leaving the mountain for the first time, coldly snorted. Xiao Yikai indifferently said, actually what Funxiang Valley's intention. Everyone is very clear. This time, if they're the first to get that nameless rare treasure, their reputation will naturally be greatly boosted. In the future, the good faction leader position, I'm afraid there will be someone who wants to have a turn to sit on it. Speaking till here, he paused for a moment and then revealed a trace of smile on his lips, said, but everyone do not have to be anxious. I expected that the strange signs had appeared here long ago, but until today, no one has obtained that rare treasure. It can be seen that there must be many twists and turns and hardships. They are eager for achievements. Let them be. Just that after we enter this death swamp, we need to be careful. This death marsh's notoriety has spread far and wide. It's dangerous and unpredictable. Moreover, there might even be evil cult sorcerers here. After entering, everyone must take care of each other. Remember. Zheng Shushu said, Senior Brother Xiao is right. It's getting late. Why don't we go in as well? Xiao Yikai nodded his head and said, all right. After entering, everyone should not be too far away. Also, do not casually land on the ground, in case you are injured by the poisonous insects or accidentally fall into the bottomless swamp. Everyone nodded. Xiao Yikai waved his right hand and took out his 7-star celestial sword. He flew up and was the first to fly inside. Then, the Azure Cloud sect disciples all stood up and turned into dazzling lights of different colors, following closely behind. After a while, this batch of Qing Yun sect young elites disappeared into the Death Marsh's fog. The empty ground at the entrance suddenly fell into an empty silence. Only between the water plants, a water bubble suddenly emerged out of nowhere. Gudu sound reverberated far away from here. Pa! Taniska gave a heavy slap on the right side of his neck. A red patch immediately appeared on his neck, but the mosquito that bit him had already flown away with a buzzing sound. It seemed to be triumphantly flying one round in front of his eyes before flying away contentedly. Taniska's face was bitter. There were small bumps on his face that were bitten by the insects. Although it was not serious, but he looked very embarrassed. Right now, he was complaining loudly. What the hell is this place? Where did all these damn mosquitoes come from? This is only a day's work, and half of my blood has been sucked away. Tani was walking in front, turned her head, and worriedly said, Grandpa, are you all right? Taniska angrily said, Nonsense. Can you see if I'm all right or not? Tani frowned and said, Strange. These mosquitoes are also strange. Why did they only bite you? Me and Pinger's sister are all right. The beautiful lady in yellow standing beside Xiao Huan also stopped in her tracks and turned her head back to look at him. She brought Tani and Taniska to walk in the middle of this swamp. Taniska was very careful, but often he still stepped on mud and water stains. She was like floating clouds and flowing water. Not a single stain stained her body. Taniska was annoyed. He saw there was a small tree beside him. He carefully went over to test it. The soil was considered firm. He sat down and loudly said, Tired from walking, let's rest for a while. Tani apologetically looked at the beauty in yellow clothes beside her. The lady whom she called Pinger's sister smiled and said, It's all right. Let's rest for a while. Tani gratefully looked at her and then looked around. The surroundings were boundless. Slightly further away was the gradually thickening fog. She could not see clearly. Along the way, if not for this Pinger's sister leading the way, she really would not be able to walk in. Right now she could not help but said, Sister, is it me and Grandpa dragging you down? If not, you can walk in the air. Won't it be much faster? That lady smiled sweetly and said, It's all right. I'm not in a hurry to come to this death marsh. Tani was surprised and said, Sister, aren't you here to fight for the treasure in this death marsh for your Hehuan sect? So this beautiful lady in light yellow attire was Jean Pinger, who is equally famous with Ghost Li and Qin Wuyan. No one knew how Xiao Huan and Zhou Yixian got acquainted with this famous evil sect, new generation expert. But Jean Pinger was obviously very fond of Tani and doted on her. She smiled and said, Yes, but this time there are so many people here. Let's take it slow, no rush. Tani felt puzzled, but after thinking carefully, she guessed that it was her Hehuan sect's secret. It was not good to continue asking. She changed the topic and said, "Sister, we have been in this death marsh for a day. Along the way, I saw that you seemed to be very familiar with this place. Don't tell me you know the way?" Jean Pinger shook her head and said, "I have never been here before." Tawny was surprised. Jean Pinger looked at her and saw Tawny's bright eyes filled with puzzlement. She could not help but smiled and said, "Have you heard of an ancient book remnant, which recorded all kinds of strange things in the world, rare beasts?" Tawny pondered for a moment and said, "Don't tell me it is strange gods and demons." Jean Pinger nodded and said, "Exactly. This book was written by an ancient person. It was said that there were originally 9 chapters, but most of them have been lost. Other than Demon Beasts, Spiritual Beast chapter, Monsters and Monsters chapter, there's also a remnant of Mountains and Rivers chapter, which I accidentally obtained. At the end of the chapter, there are some records about this death marsh." Tawny then understood, but before she could say anything, another crisp sound was heard from the other side, where Zhou Yixian was. Then she heard Zhou Yixian cursing loudly. Most likely he was bitten by some unknown mosquitoes, and his blood was sucked away. Tawny was after all his granddaughter and granddaughter. She was concerned and then thought that although there were many mosquitoes along the way, but they did not harm her and Jean Pinger at all. They only bit Zhou Yixian. There must be something strange. She naturally did not have the ability to do that. So her concern fell on Jean Pinger. She turned her head and looked at Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger smiled and nonchalantly said, "Sister, what is it?" Tawny gave a bitter laugh and said, "Sister, my grandfather this. I know you have remarkable abilities. Why don't you help him?" Jean Pinger glanced at Zhou Yixian with disdain in her eyes. But when she turned and saw Tawny's pleading eyes, she shrugged her shoulders and said, "Never mind, for your sake, I will let him have it easy." After speaking, she took out a small white jade bottle from her bosom and passed it to Tawny, said, "There is some medicine in this bottle. Let him apply it on his body. Naturally, the mosquitoes will stay away." Tawny happily received it. Her face full of smiles, said, "Thank you, sister." After speaking, she quickly walked to Zhou Yixian and passed the bottle to him. Zhou Yixian was stunned for a moment and suddenly jumped up. He angrily shouted, "There is such a good thing, and you don't." Jean Pinger's face turned cold. She stared at him. Zhou Yixian immediately did not make a sound. He looked down and took the bottle, poured out the medicine, and applied it on his body. After a while, he felt a refreshing fragrance. As expected, the mosquitoes that were flying around and disturbing him immediately quieted down. His entire body and mind relaxed. Tawny slowly walked back and returned the bottle to Jean Pinger. She hesitated for a moment and quietly said, "Sister, you are still thinking about what my grandfather did?" "Humph." Jean Pinger's face turned cold. She said, 3 years ago at the EC, he said some nonsense and almost put me into an irrecoverable death. If not for sister, you discovered it early and sacrificed 1 year of your life to cast the soul-collecting strange formation for me and got rid of the evil spirit, I would be living a life worse than death. This kind of old man, if not for." Chapter 171. Xiaohuan gently pulled Jean Pinger's hand, quietly called out, "Sister." Jean Pinger glanced at her, sighed softly, and then smiled. Her eyes also filled with tenderness, patted her hand, said, Forget it. With a good sister like you, I have long let go of the past matters. Just that sometimes when I look at your grandfather, I still don't like him. Can't help but want to make him suffer a little. Hee. Good sister, you won't blame me, right?" Xiaohuan smiled and shook her head. Jean Pinger smiled and was about to speak. Suddenly her face turned cold, swiftly turned and shouted, "Who is it?" Xiaohuan and Zhou Yixian were surprised, looked up and looked around, only saw a stretch of fog, lush water plants. Other than the occasional bubbles on the water surface, there was not even a bit of movement. But for some reason, looking at Jean Pinger's usually calm face, right now suddenly solemn and cautious, and contrary to the gentle and quiet when she was chatting with Xiaohuan, in her calmness revealed traces of murderous intent, as if she was a different person, as if the person who came was a strong enemy that could not be taken lightly. After a while, deep in the thick fog, suddenly a voice was heard, indifferently said, "Jean Fairy, We arranged to meet at Blackwater Ditch yesterday to discuss important matters. Why didn't you come? Jean Pinger by now seemed to know who the person was. Her face slightly relaxed, but the vigilance in her eyes did not lessen at all, and her tone was also not polite, coldly said, I don't know the way. The person in the fog seemed to be stifled, did not speak for a long time. After a long time said, Why, looking at Jean Ferry's meaning, don't tell me Hehuan's sect is not interested in this matter. Jean Pinger snorted, looked ahead, and said, 3 days ago, 4 of our Hehuan sect disciples were murdered 6 miles northwest of Great Wong Village. They were poisoned by black toad powder. Was it you who did it? The person in the fog seemed stunned, said no. Jean Pinger coldly said, Black toad powder is one Du clan's exclusive possession. What do you say? The person in the fog did not speak, was silent for a long time, then indifferently said, Jean Ferry, if it was me, there was no need to use poison. Jean Pinger snorted again, but did not refute. Obviously, she had no objections on this point. That person continued, However, since this matter concerns both our sects and also involves me, I will naturally give you an explanation when this matter is over. What do you think? My trip to the west this time has been rather strange. I'm afraid there's something fishy going on. I hope Ferry will consider it carefully and prioritize the important matters. Jean Pinger frowned slightly, pondered for a moment, turned and spoke to Xiao Huan. Xiao Huan, Mimi, you and your grandfather rest here for a while. I will go ahead to discuss some matters with others. I will be back before dark. Pausing, she lowered her voice, said, That thing that I gave you, do you still have it? Xiao Huan nodded and clapped her left hand. Jean Pinger smiled, pulled her hand, and softly said, Danger lurks everywhere in the Death Marsh. I am not far ahead. If anything happens to you, I will be there in an instant. But you must not wander around, especially far away from this place. Xiao Huan nodded and said, Don't worry, sister, I know. Jean Pinger smiled, let go of her hand, and said, You be careful, just call me if anything happens. After speaking, she glanced at the surroundings again, and then her body suddenly soared into the air. A purple light appeared under her clothes, carried her beautiful figure, and flew forward into the thick fog. Xiao Huan watched Jean Pinger's figure disappearing in the fog, then turned and walked to Taniska. Right now, Taniska was leaning against the small tree. Without the harassment of the mosquitoes, he immediately felt much more relaxed, but his mouth was still grumbling. If I knew this place would be like this, I would not have come even if you beat me to death. Xiao Huan smiled and said, Nobody forced you to come. You are the one who wanted to follow. Taniska snorted and then spoke to Xiao Huan. I say, you better stay away from that woman. These few years you haven't heard the rumor that she killed countless people, at the same time extremely licentious, seduced countless young men from good families. Xiao Huan spat. Her face was slightly angry, said, Grandpa, how can you say that? Taniska stuck out his tongue, did not continue. Both of them waited here. The gloomy sky gradually darkened, but Jean Pinger still did not come back. Xiao Huan slowly began to worry, wanted to go forward to take a look, but worried about Jean Pinger's words. Plus, she herself did not have much confidence. In the end, she did not dare to go. After waiting for a while, Xiao Huan could not help but feel upset. Looked up at the sky, saw the dark clouds were getting thicker. It looked like not only the sky was going to turn dark, most likely it was going to rain. Xiao Huan suddenly cried out softly. She remembered that she came in a hurry and remembered to bring everything but forgot to bring the rain gear. If it rained now, it would be terrible. Quickly turned to Taniska and asked, Grandpa, did you bring an umbrella? Taniska, startled, said, Umbrella? After a moment, he immediately understood, looked up at the sky, for a moment speechless, said, I thought you brought it. Xiao Huan anxiously said, this is bad. What if it rained? What should we do? Taniska looked around, saw there was only this small tree behind him. The rest were ponds and water plants. There was no place to shelter from the rain. He could not help but complain, This is bad. Why don't we find a place to shelter from the rain? Xiao Huan immediately shook her head, said, No, Pinger's sister said, we can't walk around, or else it will be dangerous. Taniska grumpily said, Can't walk? Can't walk. When the rain comes, I'm afraid we will be in danger of tuberculosis. Xiao Huan's brows were tightly knitted at this moment. Just as she was feeling anxious, suddenly there was a light sound in front of her. There were footsteps coming over. Xiao Huan was delighted, almost called out Pinger's sister, but suddenly shut her mouth. In the thick fog ahead, a figure walked out in quick steps. Behind him seemed to be a small figure. At the same time, a familiar grumbling voice was heard. Following you, that stinky brat. It really is my 8 lifetimes of bad luck. Not to mention being on tenterhooks every day. I still have to come to this damn place to be bitten by mosquitoes. Might as well just ask him to suck my blood dry. Gigi. Xiao Huan was surprised. The person was none other than Wild Dog Taoist, whom she had seen his fortune told in Great King Village, and behind him, hopping and skipping, was the monkey Xiao Hui. Only Ghostly was missing. Wild Dog Taoist walked, his eyes glanced, and saw Xiao Huan and Tanis Ka standing in front. Looking at him with a strange expression, he was also surprised, said, "Hey, aren't you the 2 fortune tellers? Why are you here?" Xiao Huan had not answered. Xiao Hui behind Wild Dog Taoist had sharp eyes, immediately recognized the girl in front, called out twice, exerted strength with its limbs, immediately hopped to Xiao Huan's side. Xiao Huan saw it, immediately smiled, bent down and carried Xiao Hui up, not minding that Xiao Hui's hands and feet were dirty, smiled and said, "Why are you here?" Xiao Hui seemed to be able to understand her words, grinned, and then pointed its paw backwards, gesturing at Xiao Huan incessantly. Its mouth zzz, called out incessantly. Xiao Huan naturally did not understand its meaning, but seemed to guess that Ghostly was in front. Her heart was moved. Thought, could it be that Pinger's sister was going to meet Ghostly? And just when she was hesitating, a sudden sound of thunder was heard in the sky, rumbled and spread out. The next moment, sounds of crashing were heard. Bean-sized raindrops started to fall. Xiao Huan screamed, used her hands to cover her head, carried Xiao Hui, and subconsciously ran to Tanis Ka. Anxiously said, "Grandfather, what should we do?" Tanis Ka instead gave a wry smile, but he was also straightforward, flipped his clothes over his head, said, "No choice. We can't leave even if we walk. There's nowhere to hide. Let's get wet." Xiao Huan was speechless. The sky and earth were all gray. The rain gradually became heavier. In a blink, her shoulders were already half wet, faintly discernible snow-white skin, sparkling and translucent. The monkey Xiao Hui also became much more well-behaved. Its body shrunk into a ball, curled up in Xiao Huan's embrace. Hey. Suddenly, a few mocking laughs were heard. Xiao Huan turned and looked. It was Wild Dog Taoist unhurriedly, took out an umbrella from a bundle on his back, held it up, looking extremely pleased with himself. Chapter 172. In the Death Marsh, accompanied by the heavier and heavier rain, the wind also started to blow. The monkey Xiao Hui's fur was all wet, sticking to its body. Right now it curled up and hid in Xiao Huan's embrace without moving. Only its pair of intelligent eyes were still rolling around, looking far away and then looking at Xiao Huan. The rain fell from the sky. The originally gloomy marsh right now seemed even darker. The surroundings were all gray and misty. Tanis Ka pulled out his robe and covered his head, sat under the small tree. Xiao Huan did not know whether to stand or sit. After a moment, she gave a bitter laugh and gently squatted down, hugged Xiao Hui tighter to prevent the rain from hitting it. As for herself, since she was already drenched, there was nothing she could do. Wild Dog Taoist gleefully held an umbrella and walked over, looking at his expression. Naturally, there were no words of bravery for a just cause. Pulling out the umbrella to help, protective feelings for the fairer sex, etc., he was heard saying, Hey, young lady, do you want an umbrella? It must be very uncomfortable to be drenched in the rain." Xiao Huan raised her head and glanced at Wild Dog Taoist in the rain, smiled lightly. The rain hit her fair and beautiful face, burst open like scattered pearls. Wild Dog Taoist choked for a moment. Originally, he wanted Xiao Huan to beg him for an umbrella to shield her from the rain, and then Wild Dog Taoist would make a big mockery of this young lady and finally swagger away complacently. Being a bad person to this extent, it was indeed very satisfying and extremely comfortable. Unexpectedly, Xiao Huan was out of his expectation, did not say anything. not to mention begging him. His complacent plan immediately fell through. Wild Dog Taoist was very annoyed and stared fiercely at Xiaohuan. This stare, for some reason, made him distracted. The young and beautiful young lady in front of him quietly crouched, silently enduring the rain. The wind and rain howled between heaven and earth, suddenly in Wild Dog's eyes. It was as if all the raindrops were landing on her slightly frail body. Her clothes were wet and stuck to her body. Her black hair was somewhat messy. A few strands fell beside her cheeks. Contrasting against her pale cheeks from the wind and rain, it was a soul-stirring, desolate beauty. Her shoulders used to be thin and thin. Every raindrop that fell bounced up and scattered like crystal shards, as if they were gently trembling. Her faintly discernible fair skin stuck to her clothes. Wild Dog Taoist suddenly turned around. No longer looking at her, his hands involuntarily gripped the umbrella tightly, as if to remind someone, repeatedly said, "I am a bad person. I am a bad person. I am a bad person." Xiaohuan initially did not intend to pay attention to him, but this time she instead became curious, looking at this wild dog's strange behavior. His mouth was even muttering something. She curiously asked, "Priest, what did you say?" Wild Dog Taoist was shocked. For some reason, he felt guilty. Glanced at Xiaohuan, saw Xiaohuan's expression was strange, looking at him. On her snow-white face, raindrops rolled down. Even her figure, in the wind and rain, also looked somewhat delicate and pitiful. "None of your business." Wild Dog suddenly became furious, roaring loudly. Xiaohuan was stunned for a moment, shrugged her shoulders, and lowered her head. She saw the monkey, Xiao Hui, looking at her, and could not help but smiled and stuck out her tongue at it. Xiao Hui grinned. Ji laughed twice. The wind blew and the rain drifted. This storm seemed like it would never end. Xiaohuan gradually felt her body turning cold. Just as she was worrying, suddenly she made a sound, felt that the storm above her had lessened a lot. She looked up and was stunned. Wild Dog Taoist had walked back to her side, stretched out his hand to cover her head. In just a short while, the rain had already drenched his body. "Here, this umbrella is for you." Wild Dog Taoist, as if he could not get along with someone, said in an evil voice. Xiaohuan stood up, said in surprise, "Priest." Wild Dog Taoist's eyes glanced at her face. On Xiaohuan's slightly stunned face, crystal clear water droplets quietly slid down, and some landed on her slender long eyelashes, reflecting the beautiful brilliance in her sparkling eyes, captivating one's soul. Wild Dog Taoist immediately, as if he was on fire, stuffed the umbrella into her hands and immediately walked away, disregarding the storm, loudly scolded, "You all these little girls, all day long only like to pretend to be pitiful. Damn it, damn it." Xiaohuan held the umbrella, watched Wild Dog Taoist back, suddenly laughed out, her voice like the clear and melodious wind chimes in the storm, loudly laughed and said, "Priest, you're a good person." Wild Dog Taoist did not dare to turn back. With a pei sound, angrily said, "Nonsense. Your Taoist uncle was born a bad person's seed. For the rest of my life, I will go against you good faction, good people till the end." Xiaohuan held the umbrella and stood, smiling as she watched Wild Dog Taoist's figure. Wild Dog Taoist's umbrella had just left his hand for a while. His entire body was already wet. He looked around but could not find any place to hide from the rain. In the end, he walked to the small tree where Zhou Yixian was sitting, snorted and copied Zhou Yixian, pulled his collar over his head, covered his head, did not make a sound, allowed the wind and rain to batter him. Tanis Yixian looked at Wild Dog Taoist's ugly face, saw his expression was complicated and strange, vexed and embarrassed, suddenly laughed out. After laughing, immediately he could not hold it in, almost did not even put down the hand that was holding up his clothes. "Ha ha ha ha," laughed nonstop. Wild Dog Taoist flew into a rage out of humiliation, angrily said, "What are you laughing at?" Zhou Yixian pointed at him and laughed out loud. Even ignoring the wind and rain hitting his face, laughed loudly and said, "I am a bad person, I am a bad person." Wild Dog Taoist immediately blushed. Turned out Zhou Yixian's ears were actually quite sharp. What Xiaohuan did not hear clearly, he actually heard it from afar. Right now he saw Wild Dog Taoist did a good deed, but seemed to go against some principles. Very annoyed. He really could not hold back and laughed out loud. Almost fell down. Wild Dog Taoist was enraged. Jumped up, Zhou Yixian was startled. His mouth was still laughing. His body moved back. Unexpectedly, the road was slippery in the rain. He was not careful. Pung! He fell backwards, fell into a mud pit. His body was covered with mud. Wild Dog Taoist was stunned, saw Zhou Yixian's hands and feet dancing, looking very comical. Immediately his anger dissipated, could not help but also laughed out loud. Both of them joked and scolded each other, after which they quarreled incessantly. Xiao Huan stood at a distance, smiled, and did not step forward. Right now the storm was pouring down. The rain seemed to have gotten heavier. Between heaven and earth was somber. Just that in this dangerous death marsh, there was still a place where there was a faint warmth. At dusk, this rain suddenly stopped. A moment ago the sky was still dark like it was the end of the world. The next moment the clouds had dispersed. Not sure if this was the unique weather of the death marsh. Xiao Huan let out a long breath, closed the umbrella, and looked up at the sky. Although it was still dusk, but after the heavy rain, the fog had retreated. The sky seemed to be brighter than daytime. Even in the air, the rotten smell had temporarily disappeared. Xiao Huan turned back, looked down at that small tree. Zhou Yixian and Wild Dog Taoist were indeed still sitting there. When the storm was heavy, both of them were still arguing loudly, but now that they had experienced the wind and rain, obviously they did not have much energy. Weakly put down the clothes that covered their heads, a sound of water pouring down from the clothes. Xiao Huan smiled, turned around and put down Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui landed on the ground, jumped twice, and then its entire body trembled, causing the water droplets to splash everywhere. Even Xiao Huan could not dodge in time. Xiao Huan laughingly scolded, saw a patch of water plants not far away. Seemed to be a small pond. She walked over, found a place with less water plants, and looked down. The water plants in the pond were lush. Even this part of the water surface, which was slightly wider, also seemed to reflect a faint and clear jade green color. Unable to see how deep this pond was, Xiao Huan looked at the water surface, looked at her own reflection, slowly tidied up her appearance, arranged her hair that was messed up by the wind and rain, just at the clothes on her body, after all wet by the wind and rain, stuck to her body, made her feel uncomfortable. Far behind her, Zhou Yixian and Wild Dog seemed to be quarreling again, but their voices were not loud and could not be heard clearly. As for the surroundings, it suddenly quieted down from the incessant wind and rain till now. It seemed to be especially quiet. Even on the green water plants beside, the crystal clear water droplets quietly slid down along the green veins of the leaves, dripping into the pond water, seemed to be especially loud. Xiao Huan could not help but took a deep breath, this slightly sweet air after the rain. Suddenly, Xiao Hui, who had been quiet behind her, made a sharp and nervous zizi cry. Xiao Huan was startled, opened her eyes, and wanted to ask, but suddenly her voice went hoarse. In the pond in front of her, in the dense water plants ahead, there was a pair of eyes, twice the size of an ordinary person's, watching her. Xiao Huan cried out involuntarily. Zhou Yixian and Wild Dog Taoist were also shocked, but before they could react, the pond water in front of Xiao Huan suddenly exploded. A thick water column with a loud bang attacked straight toward Xiao Huan. Xiao Hui's sharp cry whistled. Xiao Huan's face turned pale, but her mind was still not in a panic. Subconsciously retreated a step. Her left hand shrunk into her bosom. In a flash, the water column was about to hit Xiao Huan. Suddenly an orange halo shot out from Xiao Huan's left hand, formed into a light screen, blocked in front of her. Chapter 173. The thick water column was blocked by the orange light curtain and stopped in midair, unable to move forward. At the same time, a hoarse muffled sound came from the water column. The water column swayed in midair, and a black shadow appeared in the white water spray. It was about to fall back into the pond. Xiao Huan was still in shock and was about to retreat. At this moment, a sharp whistle was heard in the air. A light yellow figure like lightning sped over. In an instant it was before her. It was Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger's pretty face was evil. Her right hand waved. The purple energy in that instant surged straight into the pond. A deafening sound was heard. A wall of water surged up in the pond, straight to the sky, several zhongs high. That black figure was actually forced out by her, but still had some strength left. although it did not dare to fight head-on with Jean Pinger, but it followed the current and flipped backwards, plopped into the water plants. Its body twisted, like a fish, swiftly swam forward. Everyone was stunned. That monster looked like a human, but its movements in the water, how could an ordinary person do it? Jean Pinger frowned slightly, but did not pursue. That monster was about to disappear into the mist at the far end of the pond. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the monster let out another hoarse and angry roar. In the thin mist, a dark green light with a hint of blood red flashed. The monster immediately turned around and flew back, as if it was extremely afraid of that dark green light. Just that while its body was in midair, it suddenly saw the green water plants in the pond, extending from its feet to both sides, suddenly all rapidly withered, turning into a burnt yellow color. Even the surface of the water also faintly turned black, only towards Jean Pinger's direction. The water plants remained the same. The monster seemed to make a dying roar, but in the end did not dare to land in the pond, flew towards Jean Pinger, obviously intending to fight to the death. Xiao Huan cried out, "Sister, be careful." Jean Pinger's expression was as usual. A sneer appeared on her pretty face. The black monster came closer and closer. Jean Pinger's pretty eyes flashed. Her right hand rose up. The purple light flourished. The surrounding people could not see clearly what kind of magical weapon was in that resplendent purple light, but only saw the purple light like a knife, chopping down on that monster's head. That monster with a muffled cry. Its body was thrown up 10 zhang high and then fell heavily down, its limbs twitching. It seemed like it would not survive. The surroundings gradually quietened down. The waves in the pond gradually calmed down. Everyone looked at the monster on the ground. Then everyone, including Jean Pinger, was stunned. This was indeed a monster, but a human-like monster. Like a human, it had 4 limbs and even tight-fitting clothes. However, it seemed like it was for convenience in the water, so it had very few clothes. On the exposed skin, there were pieces of what looked like fish scales. But the most shocking thing was its head. It was a fish's head, lips, gills, and even its eyes. Like a fish did not have eyelids. Right now, this fish-headed monster was lying on the ground. Blood kept flowing out from its mouth, its body motionless. Seemed like it was struck to death by Jean Pinger's heavy blow. Xiao Huan looked at the monster on the ground, felt a chill in her heart, subconsciously shrank behind Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger patted her shoulder, quietly consoled her. MOG. From the mist ahead, 2 people slowly walked out, although they walked out at the same time, but both of them were rather far from each other, as if still wary of each other. It was Ghost Li and one Du Clan Qin Huiyan. Ghost Li's eyes turned, paused on Xiao Huan behind Jean Pinger, and then shifted away. Xiao Huan looked at Ghost Li and then looked at Qin Huiyan. Her heart involuntarily shook. These 3 evil sect's most outstanding young generation experts, suddenly meeting in secret. The reason behind it, once one thought about it, it made one feel bewildered and excited. Qin Huiyan walked to the monster, used his feet to kick its body. The monster flipped over and did not move. Qin Huiyan indifferently said, "Dead." Xiao Hui, who was hiding at the side, Gigi called out twice, jumped onto Ghost Li's shoulder. Ghost Li looked at Wild Dog Taoist and then glanced at Zhou Yixian and Xiao Huan, seemed to frown, and then unhurriedly said, "What should be said has been said. Let's leave it at that." Speaking, he turned and was about to leave. Qin Huiyan suddenly said, "Ghost Li, brother, this monster that is neither human nor beast suddenly appeared here. It is rather strange. Don't tell me you don't have any thoughts." Ghost Li stopped, did not speak, but Jean Pinger glanced at Qin Huiyan and said, "Why, you know what this thing is?" Qin Huiyan was surprised for a moment and then shook his head slightly. Looking at Jean Pinger and Ghost Li's expressions, they also did not seem to know where this half-human, half-fish monster came from. And at this moment, suddenly someone walked out from the side, loudly said, "I know where this monster came from." Ghost Li and the rest were shocked at the same time, turned and looked. It was Zhou Yixian. Even Xiao Huan was surprised, said, "Grandfather, you know?" Zhou Yixian's face still had a little bit of mud stuck to his forehead, but right now his bearing was extraordinary. Clasping his hands behind his back, his face arrogant, said, "Your grandfather has roamed the world all his life. The bridges I have walked are even more than the roads you have walked. Do you think I have lived in vain?" This monster is called human fish. Actually, it is not considered a demon, but one of the 63 different races in the southern border, 10,000 Great Mountains, the human fish race. Ghostly and the rest were stunned. Of course, everyone knew about the southern border 10,000 Great Mountains, but in the southern border wilderness, there were actually 63 different races. That was unheard of. But looking at Zhou Yixian's expression, he did not seem to be making it up. Jean Pinger frowned and said, "That is strange. The southern border is not less than 10,000 miles from this death marsh. This human fish came to this place. What is it for?" This question made Zhou Yixian, who was still smug just now, stumbled, scratched his head, and could only say that I do not know. Everyone was silent for a moment, seeing that there was no conclusion even if they continued to think. Ghostly was the first to turn and walk away. Xiao Hui, the monkey crouched on his shoulder, suddenly turned its head and waved to Xiao Huan, grinning. Xiao Huan smiled. Wild Dog looked at Xiao Huan and then followed up, but before a few steps, Xiao Huan suddenly called out from behind, "Priest, there are many dangers ahead. You must be careful." Jean Pinger was surprised, looked at Xiao Huan, only to see Xiao Huan smiling. Her expression did not change. Instead, Wild Dog Taoist in front was walking very fast, not knowing if he heard or pretended not to hear. Without even turning his head, he quickly followed Ghostly. Qin Weiyan glanced at the direction Ghostly was walking towards, walked to Jean Pinger, smiled, and said, "Jean Fairy's purple light blade is renowned throughout the world. After seeing it today, it really lives up to its reputation." Jean Pinger smiled faintly and said, "Qin Gongzi is teasing. How can I compare to you? Just casually applying a little poison, and this pond has turned into a poisonous pond. Not even a blade of grass will grow in 50 years. Qin Weiyan's gaze froze. His expression also seemed to turn cold. Looked at Jean Pinger for a while, and then slowly said, "My humble self's duckweed little poison was only developed for less than half a year. It is just an insignificant skill, not worthy of a master's discerning eyes. I have never used it before. Jean Fairy actually knows about it. It really makes my humble self admire. Jean Pinger met his gaze, without any intention of backing down, said, "Qin Gongzi is overpraising me." Qin Weiyan looked at her again. A cold glint flashed past his eyes, and then a smile surfaced on his face. He nodded and said, "As such, my humble self will take my leave first, the matter that we have agreed on." Jean Pinger interrupted him, said, "Don't worry, I know what to do about that matter." Qin Weiyan smiled and said, "All right." After speaking, he nodded to Xiao Huan, considered as a greeting, turned and left, very quickly disappearing into the mist. Until Qin Weiyan's figure disappeared, Jean Pinger was still silent for a moment, suddenly heaved a long sigh. Xiao Huan, who was standing behind her, almost at the same time felt that Jean Pinger's body had been tensed up all along. Only now did she relax. "Sister, are you all right?" Xiao Huan was somewhat worried. Jean Pinger shook her head slightly, glanced at Xiao Huan, softly said, "Just now I did not make it in time. You're not injured, right?" Xiao Huan smiled, shook her head and said, "I am all right. Just now when it was raining, I got drenched, but luckily there is. Jean Pinger was surprised, said, "What is it?" Xiao Huan stamped her feet and said, "I forgot to return the umbrella to that Taoist." Jean Pinger shrugged her shoulders, said, "Then keep it first, if there is a chance to see it again in future." Xiao Huan silently nodded. Jean Pinger glanced afar, suddenly seemed to be touched, quietly said to Xiao Huan, "Xiao Huan, in future you must be careful of those two people." Xiao Huan did not understand, said, "What?" Jean Pinger's eyes flashed, seemed to have a cold glint, indifferently said, "Those two men just now are ruthless people. If you see them in the future, it is best to leave immediately. You must not go near them." Xiao Huan was silent, slowly nodded, but for some reason in her heart, suddenly felt perplexed. Indistinctly recalled many years ago that Qing Yun youth who was cheated of his money by Zhou Yixian. Chapter 174. Wild Dog Taoist followed, ghostly, one step at a time, heading deeper into the death marsh. Because there had just been a heavy rain, the already soft ground right now became even more muddy, but for some reason, ever since Ghostly met Qin Weiyan and Jean Pinger, he insisted on not using his magical weapon to fly. and instead walked on the ground. As if he and Jean Pinger were the same, faintly apprehensive about something. If it was in the past, Wild Dog Taoist would naturally break out in curses, or at least grumble incessantly, but right now, he seemed to be absent-minded and did not say a single word, quietly following behind Ghostly, which made Ghostly feel puzzled. Ghostly looked at Wild Dog Taoist's absent-minded look, suppressed his voice, and indifferently said, "What's wrong with him?" He seemed to be talking to himself because other than the ice-cold marsh pond and water plants, there was no one else, other than the monkey Xiao Hui, who was crouching on his shoulder, which was also Xiao Hui, who seemed to be drowsy just now, but after hearing Ghostly's question, it seemed to be triggered by something and immediately became excited. Its extremely quick-witted eyes rolled around, suddenly jumped down from Ghostly's shoulder, and started to dance with joy. This strange behavior, even Wild Dog Taoist, who was following behind, was shocked and looked at it. Xiao Hui looked rather excited, grinned and laughed, waving its hands and feet at Ghostly. The next moment its eyes rolled and suddenly jumped to the side, scooped up some water from the small pond, but poured it onto its own monkey head, and then pointed to the sky, jumping up and down. Wild Dog Taoist stared blankly, walked to Ghostly and said, "What's wrong? Has this monkey gone mad?" Ghostly instead frowned, and then quietly said to Xiao Hui, "Rain." Xiao Hui was overjoyed, nodded its head repeatedly, and then casually plucked a leaf from an unknown plant and swung it above its head, as if blocking something, and then made a coy posture, its body twisting here and there, and then, like acting, the leaf changed from right hand to left hand and again from left to right hand. Wild Dog watched and watched, suddenly without rhyme or reason he felt guilty, stared at that strange monkey, said to Ghostly, "Crazy, crazy. This monkey must be crazy." Right now, the monkey Xiao Hui tossed the leaf in its hand and jumped back on a Ghostly's shoulder in 2 or 3 leaps, and then pointed to the direction behind them, calling out incessantly. Ghostly was silent for a moment, slowly turned around, and looked at Wild Dog Taoist. Wild Dog Taoist forced a smile and said, What are you looking at me for?" Ghostly glanced at the bundle behind him, indifferently said, "Just now when it was raining, did you lend the umbrella to—" Speaking till here, he frowned slightly again, glanced at Xiao Hui, thought for a moment, and then said, "You lent the umbrella to that fortune-telling young lady to shelter from the rain?" Squeak. Not waiting for Wild Dog Taoist to speak, the monkey Xiao Hui on Ghostly's shoulder had already jumped up, extremely excited. The monkey's face was smiling till its eyes were almost squinting. Wild Dog Taoist's face was red and white, his expression extremely awkward, suddenly pointed at Ghostly and angrily said, "Stinky brat, let me tell you, your Taoist uncle used to kill people like flies. If not 1,000 people died at my hands, there are at least 800. Ghostly glanced at him and actually ignored him, turned and strode away. His mouth indifferently said, "Whether you killed 1,000 or 800 people, what has it got to do with me?" Wild Dog Taoist choked. His words, to boost his morale, could not continue. Ghostly in front slowly said, "Besides, whether you killed 1,000 or 800 people, what has it got to do with you lending the umbrella to that young lady?" Speaking till here, he stopped and turned back to look at Wild Dog Taoist. Wild Dog was shocked, as if facing a formidable enemy, said, What do you want to do now? What did you say?" Ghostly assessed him, suddenly laughed, and said, "But today's matter, ever since you were in Forsaken Abyss, it gave me a shock again." He turned around and walked away slowly. His voice became softer and softer, but Wild Dog could hear it clearly. "I didn't expect that you would also do this kind of hero-saving beauty thing." Wild Dog Taoist was stunned at the spot, suddenly lost in thought. When he recovered, Ghostly had already brought Xiao Hui far away, almost disappearing into the mist ahead. Wild Dog Taoist looked at that direction, suddenly flew into a rage, stamped his feet, and said, "Hey, I have always been a bad person. I have never done that kind of thing in my life. And besides, that young lady can be called beauty, Wild Dog Taoist scratched his head, suddenly frowned, and stopped. After a long while he seemed to be talking to himself. "That young lady actually looks all right, too." After speaking, Wild Dog Taoist himself seemed to be stunned, suddenly shook his head violently, cursed in a low voice, and strode towards the direction where Ghostly had gone, not long after he disappeared into the thickening mist of the night. The surroundings were quiet, the sky was getting darker. The darkness came and gradually drowned everything. The other end of the Death Marsh. Evil sect Chang, Shanhal sect leader Yu Yangzi, was dressed in white, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked up at the sky. The night breeze in the marsh blew past, causing his clothes to flutter slightly. He looked extraordinary, like a celestial being. Other than his left hand, his sleeves were empty, adding an inexplicable comical look. That was the mark of the battle at Qingyun Hill, where he was unfortunately injured by the world's #1 sword, Zhu Xian. The night breeze was slightly chilly. The air seemed to still carry the dampness from the heavy rain just now. The darkness pervaded the surroundings, but only his figure, still standing there, unyielding and conspicuous. In the darkness behind him, indistinct breathing sounds could be heard. That was his disciple hiding in the darkness, patiently waiting for his orders in the darkness. Evil sect Chang Shanhal rose up 800 years ago. To Yu Yangzi's generation, it was already the 7th generation, with a long history, but no one was clearer than Yu Yangzi himself. Behind this limitless glory, Chang Shanhal was facing a crisis. There was no successor. 10 years ago in the Qingyun battle, Yu Yangzi was unanimously elected as the leader by the other 3 big evil sect branches. It was the time in these few hundred years when Chang Shanhal's reputation in the evil sect was at its peak. At that time, Yu Yangzi was complacent and had a dozen highly skilled disciples. All of them were painstakingly nurtured by him in the past 100 years. At that time, Yu Yangzi really thought there was nothing in this world that could stop him. As long as he could defeat the decrepit Qingyun sect in one move, Chang Shanhal's reputation would naturally awe the evil sect, with his own strength and the help of his highly skilled subordinates. Chang Shanhal would be the second Blood Forger Hall in the next 800 years, and he would become the second Elder Blackheart. Just that, all these beautiful dreams, on Qingyun Hill, under Zhu Xian's sword, turned into bubbles. He himself lost a left hand in Zhu Xian's sword formation, not to mention that his skills were greatly damaged. Because Chang Shanhal was the leader, the highly skilled disciples were naturally in the front line for the decisive battle. Tong Tian Peak and Qingyun sect various elder leaders forcefully expended half of their strength, and after that Zhu Xian sword formation was activated, the remaining highly skilled disciples of Chang Shanhal were also in a mess. Only 1 or 2 managed to escape. It could be said that the entire army was wiped out. In this world, everything was easy to obtain. The most difficult to obtain was actually talented people, especially those who were nurtured by oneself and completely trusted. For the past 10 years, Yu Yangzi had put in painstaking effort. Chang Shanhal slowly started to improve again, but in Yu Yangzi's heart, that shadow was getting bigger and bigger. The battle at Qingyun almost completely destroyed Chang Shanhal's main fighting force. These few years, if not for Yu Yangzi's own high level of cultivation, and deterred the surrounding enemies who were eyeing him like a tiger. Especially 7 years ago, he made a prompt decision, disregarding his sect's opposition, and forcefully moved the headquarters to a remote place like Death Marsh, far away from the other 3 powerful sects' sphere of influence. If not, the consequences would be unknown. But just 1 month ago, the increasingly intense internal fight in the evil sect came to an abrupt end. The last powerful small and medium sect Blood Forger Hall was finally subdued by Ghost King's sect. Everyone stood in line. After a short period of suffocating silence, Yu Yangzi instinctively predicted that what would follow would very soon be an intense internal fight between the 4 big branches of the evil sect. After all, in the hearts of numerous evil sect disciples, the figure of Elder Blackheart unifying the evil sect 800 years ago, moving unhindered across the world, was already an eternal legend. But legend was just legend. At this moment, it was extremely disadvantageous to Chang Shanhal and even Yu Yangzi. Limited by their strength, Chang Shanhal in the internal fight for the small and medium sects had the heart, but not the strength. As such, the gap between their strength and the other 3 powerful sects widened. Yu Yangzi was deeply worried about this and almost could not sleep at night. And at this moment, as if heaven had opened its eyes, just beside Chang Shanhal, in the Death Marsh, a strange sign of the birth of a rare treasure suddenly appeared. Yu Yangzi was both surprised and delighted. if they could really obtain a rare treasure like Qing Yun Sek's Juxian ancient sword. First of all, Chang Shenhao would not have a problem in protecting themselves, and then with further development. It was not impossible for them to make a comeback in the future. Under such circumstances, Chang Shenhao saw the rare treasure in the Death Marsh as their own and would not allow others to dip their hands in it. Just that not knowing who leaked the news, within a few days, this news had already spread throughout the world. Immediately, the whole world looked askance. The good and evil faction experts one after another gathered in the Death Marsh. Yu Yangzi was both shocked and furious, but at this moment, he could no longer retreat. Hence, he mobilized all of Chang Shenhao's forces and deployed them in the Death Marsh. On one hand, searching for the whereabouts of that rare treasure. On the other hand, they were in charge of killing the invading enemies. In these 10 over days, the number of people who were secretly killed by Chang Shenhao in the Death Marsh was already not less than 10. Among them were good faction loose immortals. There were also evil sect experts from other sections. For the survival of his sect, Yu Yangzi had already disregarded everything. Chapter 175. This night, Yu Yangzi received a secret report from his sect near the bottomless pit at the outskirts of the Death Marsh. A group of good faction people camped there, preparing to spend the night there. And following that wave after wave of reports from the spies, Yu Yangzi's face gradually turned cold. In his heart, he already understood who those people were. That was a group of Qing Yun Sek's most elite young disciples. Originally, there should only be a dozen of them, but hearing the spies report, right now that group of people had already reached more than 10 people, and among them there were even monks and Funxiang Valley people. Yu Yangzi frowned tightly, breathed deeply, and gazed afar, as if waiting for something. After a long time, light footsteps were heard from the darkness behind him. A middle-aged man who looked shrewd and skinny walked out and came to Yu Yangzi's side. Yu Yangzi immediately turned around and faced him. Obviously, this person's identity was not ordinary. This middle-aged man was called Meng Ji, one of the top experts under Chang Shenhao Yu Yangzi, and also one of the few Chang Shenhao experts who survived the battle at Qingyan Hill. Therefore, he was deeply trusted by Yu Yangzi. Right now, Yu Yangzi could not make up his mind because he was waiting for this person to return. Meng Ji bowed to Yu Yangzi. Yu Yangzi shook his head slightly and said, "Forget it. No need to be so courteous. How is it?" This question was asked without any head or tail, but Meng Ji clearly knew the meaning behind Yu Yangzi's question. He quietly said, "Subordinate has already brought people to the other side of the Death Marsh, Blackwater Ditch, White Horse River area to search. Did not discover Ghost King sect, Wandu clan, and Hehuan sect people entering in large numbers. Only a few small sects who strayed away. Subordinate has already dealt with them directly." Yu Yangzi's spirits lifted. For the first time, a smile appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "Good. Like this, we have no worries. Tonight we will launch a surprise attack on Qingyun's sect, Tianyin Temple, and Funxiang Valley, those young people who do not know the immensity of heaven and earth. Get rid of these people first, then the good faction will not be able to compete with us." Meng Ji, however, did not seem to be happy. Instead, looked worried. He hesitated for a moment and eventually still said, "Sect leader, but 3 days ago, the secret sentries near Great King Village sent back news. It seemed like Ghost Li and Qin Huiyan had already reached the vicinity of the Death Marsh, and Hehuan sect's Jean Pinger has always been elusive. We must not let our guard down." Yu Yangzi's face muscles twitched, revealing a resentful expression. He hatefully said, "How would I not know about this? Those good faction people only want that treasure, but Wandu clan, Ghost King's sect group. What they want is my life." Meng Ji's body trembled. No one knew what he was thinking. His expression was uncertain as he whispered, "Sovereign, what should we do?" Yu Yangzi snorted, took a deep breath, slowed down his body, said, "Now that things have come to this, there is no turning back for us. While Wandu clan, Ghost King sect, and Hehuan sect's men have not arrived, we will first deal with these good faction little bastards, and then use all our strength to search for the rare treasure. Once we get it, looking at the strange signs in the past few days, this must be a rare treasure. Then we will not be afraid of the other 3 sects." Meng Ji lowered his head and said, "Sovereign is wise." Yu Yangzi nodded his head slightly and then turned around, calmed himself down, stretched out his only right hand, and heavily waved it forward in the night. Immediately, human figures moved in the darkness, and after a while, a large group of Chang Shunhal disciples appeared. With familiarity, they dashed towards the direction that Yu Yongzi was pointing at. The night was boundless, desolate, and filled with murderous aura. Death Marsh, bottomless pit. This piece of land, which looked like a piece of flat land in the daytime. For some reason, it had such a strange name. Unless it was the villagers who had lived near the Death Marsh for many years, they would know that in this area of land, there was a large piece of land in the middle that looked no different from the surroundings, all overgrown with weeds, but in actual fact, it was a huge bottomless pit, and the suction force of the mud was extremely strong. If ordinary people were to accidentally step in, they would be sucked down in a short while, and from then on rotting silently in the deep marsh. The reason why Death Marsh got its name was because in the marsh, there were countless of these terrifying places where people could be killed invisibly. However, these good faction youths were obviously not ordinary people. Qinyan's sect group of over 10 people traveled in the Death Marsh for a few days and met disciples sent out by Tian'in Temple and Funxiang Valley. When the three parties met up, there were familiar faces here. Tian'in Temple was still led by Fa Xiang and Fashion, and among the Funxiang Valley disciples, there were Li Sun and Yan Hong. Just that after meeting, their relationship was not the same. The Qinyan sect disciples, led by Xiao Yikai, and the Tian'in Temple disciples got along harmoniously, talking and laughing, but the Funxiang Valley group had some estrangement with these two big sects and seemed to intentionally maintain a distance. Everyone understood the subtle meaning, but on the surface, they were still courteous. The three big good faction big sects were still working together for the world's righteousness and morals, slaying the evil, exterminating the evil faction. This night, everyone stayed near the bottomless pit. After lighting the bonfire and repeatedly instructing his junior brothers and sisters not to move around, Xiao Yikai then invited Tian'in Temple Fa Xiang and Funxiang Valley Li Sun to one side and quietly discussed. At this moment, Li Sun frowned slightly, disdain hidden deep in his eyes, but he still maintained an amiable look on his face and quietly said, "Xiao senior brother, aren't you thinking too much?" Xiao Yikai smiled and said, "What is Li senior brother's opinion? Please speak. I am all ears." Xiao Yikai and Fa Xiang's eyes were looking at him. Li Sun paused and then said, "I thought, ever since our three sects entered the marsh, we're like a hot knife cutting through butter. The disciples sent out by Chang Shunhal were defeated by us again and again. And ever since the Qing Yun Hill battle, Chang Shunhal's highly skilled disciples were either dead or injured. Other than Yu Yongzi, who is still struggling to hold the fort, the rest are nothing to worry about. Xiao senior brother instead saying that tonight is full of danger. Isn't it too much?" Xiao Yikai pondered for a moment and said, "What Li senior brother said is indeed reasonable. But in the evil sect Chang Shunhal, Yu Yongzi's skills are extremely high. Just him alone is enough for us to not belittle him. Besides, ever since Chang Shunhal rose to become one of the evil sect's four great sects, it has already been 800 years. As the saying goes, a centipede dies, but does not fall down. They are also determined to get this Death Marsh treasure. It is inevitable that a corner dog will do something desperate. We better be more careful." Fa Xiang nodded and said, "Xiao senior brother is right. We indeed have to be careful." When Li Sun saw the two of them speaking like that, it was not good for him to say anything more. But he was arrogant, and his eyes still revealed some of it. He said indifferently, "Then according to the two senior brothers, what should we do tonight?" Fa Xiang looked at his expression and was stunned for a moment. He turned and glanced at Xiao Yikai, but Xiao Yikai acted as if nothing had happened, as if he did not see anything, still smiling and said, "Li senior brother is indeed wise, with brother's great talent. When we succeed in the future, Li senior brother will remember it as the first merit." Li Sun smiled and did not even thank him modestly. Fa Xiang looked at Xiao Yikai's expressionless face. Suddenly the figure of that youth called Zhang Xiaofan flashed past his eyes. If only he was here today. How good would that be? He felt a pain in his heart for no reason, gently sighed, and then heard Xiao Yikai's low voice starting to set up. He quickly concentrated and listened. Xiao Yikai suppressed his voice and said softly, "Both senior brothers, tonight the night sky, seemed to have deepened by a few degrees. The night in the Death Marsh seemed to be shrouded in the dark clouds. Perhaps every night, this huge marsh would be shrouded in a dense fog. The night sky was gray and misty, not to mention the moon. Not even half a star could be seen. Near the bottomless pit, the place where those good faction young disciples were staying, other than a few remnants of the struggling bonfire ashes, everything was quiet, not a single sound. Looking indistinctly in the darkness, those good faction disciples were curled up in their clothes, covering their bodies tightly. After all, the young people's cultivation was not high enough and could not withstand the bone-chilling night chill in this death marsh. The Changshan Hall disciples soundlessly surrounded this group of people from all directions, in the darkness, quietly waiting for Yu Yangzi's orders. Yu Yangzi slowly stretched out his only right hand. Mengji, who was standing beside him, suddenly said in a low voice, "Head." Yu Yangzi's hand paused for a moment, feeling slightly dissatisfied, but after all, Mengji's position in his heart was not low. He still controlled his temper and said, "What is it?" Mengji also seemed to sense Yu Yangzi's dissatisfaction. After hesitating for a moment, he still said, "Head, look at these good faction people. Why is there not even a single night guard?" Yu Yangzi was stunned for a moment and then said, "These yellow-hair brats, they're arrogant and haughty. These few days I have repeatedly used the strategy of underestimating the enemy. They have long thought that we will not be able to withstand a single blow and totally did not put us in their eyes. It is not surprising that there is no night guard." Mengji's countenance changed, but in the end he still remained silent. Yu Yangzi did not bother about him anymore. His right hand flipped, and a strange black and white mirror appeared in his hand, following which it flew up into the air. A dazzling ray of light glided across the night. All of the Changshan Hall disciples shouted at the same time. Their voices reverberated far in the night, swarming forward, carrying with them a boundless murderous intention. In that stretch of fragile remnant light, there was a faint desolation. The last bit of ashes, at this moment, quietly extinguished, drowned in darkness. After a moment, suddenly there was a clear, sharp sound, like a dragon's roar. A ray of jade green light, a ray of blue light, a ray of gold light, a ray of white light, a ray of green light. 5 rays of brilliant, dazzling, strange lights, in the darkness of the night, like sharp swords piercing through the firmament. In the deepest part of the darkness, suddenly appeared and charged towards those Changshan Hall disciples. And behind them, even more dazzling lights, one after another, appeared. Yu Yangzi saw it, and his countenance changed greatly. Chapter 176. It happened suddenly. The sudden change in the darkness. Those Changshan Hall disciples were shocked for a moment and did not react immediately. And in this split second, the good faction disciples who were already prepared all offered themselves. Each wielded their magical weapons and charged forward, using intent to kill the unsuspecting. Naturally, they had a great advantage, and the good faction disciples here. All of them were outstanding successors of the big sects. Their cultivation may not be comparable to Yu Yangzi, the kind of person, but against the ordinary sect members, they were far superior. This moment, like a tiger entering a flock of sheep, the good and evil faction had always been hostile towards each other and would definitely not show mercy when they attacked. In the night, all kinds of lights flashed chaotically. Miserable cries and screams were heard incessantly. The smell of blood immediately arose, drifting in the swamp. At the forefront of the various lights, a dark green, dazzling cold light flashed. It was Qing Yun's sect, Longsho Valley disciple Lin Jingyu's Dragon Slayer sword. This young man, who had never revealed his talents before, right now suddenly became so dazzling and eye-catching. The Dragon Slayer sword suddenly made a sharp sound. The dark green grand light shot up to the sky, enveloping its owner. Without any misgivings, he charged into the Changshan Hall people. That was the most brilliant light in the night. His eyes were cold, but deep in his pupils there seemed to be a fanaticism, as if thirsting for the fresh blood under the cold light. The first few Changshan Hall disciples, after the dark green light flashed past, turned into a rain of blood. The crowd clamored and surrounded him, but Lin Jingyu seemed to not care about the enemies attacking from behind. Only looking ahead, he charged straight to the place with the most people, killing left and right. Unstoppable, wherever he passed, flesh and blood flew. After a while, the other good faction disciples also caught up, each wielding their magical weapons, and fought with the Changshan Hall people. Xiao Yikai, in the midst of the chaotic battle, was still shaken by Lin Jingyu. Loudly shouted, "Lin Jr. brother, be careful." But Lin Jingyu seemed to not hear the warning. Right now, he was totally different from that youth who studied at Longsho Valley, his hand holding the Dragon Slayer sword, his body becoming the Evil Slayer light. Not knowing how many Changshan Hall disciples surrounded him, but he did not even turn his head to look. The Dragon Slayer sword flashed and danced in the night. Countless amounts of fresh blood sword and spilled in front of him, drenching his clothes. In the end, countless of Changshan Hall disciples chased after him and those in front of him. Almost no one dared to stop him. Everyone fled, not daring to face this demon-like person. Suddenly, an ear-piercing, woo-woo sound came from the depths of the darkness. A white light flashed, and a round object spun rapidly as it fell from the sky, smashing down on Lin Jingyu's head. Lin Jingyu shouted loudly. The Dragon Slayer sword, which was dancing in the air and killing the enemy, instantly flew back. He grabbed it and stabbed straight towards the sky. Instantly, the jade green light flourished, and he soared into the air. Unexpectedly, that disc object in the air was even more powerful. Black and white lights alternated, and actually in the midst of the magnificent jade green light, forcefully pressed down. Lin Jingyu's countenance changed for the first time. He knew that an expert had finally appeared in Changshan Hall. Although this unknown magical weapon in the air looked unremarkable, but it turned a blind eye to the Dragon Slayer sword's unparalleled sharpness, bringing with it a heavy pressure, swiftly pressed down. Lin Jingyu's face instantly turned paler with that disc's pressure. With a loud roar, his entire body flew out. Just a moment away, that disc came crashing down with a rumble, creating a one-zhong radius big pit at the place where he was originally standing. The ruthlessness of the force showed that this person was also extremely resentful. Lin Jingyu's body leapt out. The Qing Yun sect disciples behind him saw it, and one after another came up to support him. But he had recklessly charged into the Changshan Hall crowd and was surrounded by enemies. Before he could steady himself on the ground, his body was in severe pain, and in a short while, there were already 3 or 4 sharp blades slashing into his body. Fresh blood spurted out like a fountain, bright like a flower, staining his clothes red. The corner of Lin Jingyu's eyes twitched, but he did not show the slightest fear or retreat. The Dragon Slayer sword's light in his own blood splattered, but it became even more dazzling, circling around his body. Immediately miserable cries were heard. 3 or 4 Changshan Hall disciples staggered back, their arms broken and blood spurting out. It looked like they would not survive. The crowd looked at this young man's valiance, and for a moment were surprised. After a while, the good faction people charged over. The Changshan Hall disciples did not dare to prolong the battle and retreated. And at the place where Lin Jingyu was repulsed, Yu Yongzi slowly appeared, his face ferocious, where was the slightest bit of his usual celestial bearing. By this time, the fierce battle gradually stopped. The Changshan Hall disciples gradually returned behind Yu Yongzi. The good faction young disciples also stood together. Xiao Yikai, Fa Xiang, Li Sun, and the rest stood at the forefront. Small Bamboo Valley one man walked over and helped Lin Jingyu to bandage his wound to stop the bleeding. At the same time, she said in a low voice, "You, this young man, how can you not take your own life seriously?" Lin Jingyu and Wen Min had only met a few times at Tongtian Peak, but right now she suddenly took care of him. He couldn't help but was surprised. These 10 years, he had been learning from that mysterious old man in Qing Yun sect Tongtian Peak founder's ancestral hall. Relying on his own aptitude and perseverance, he finally achieved great success. Today, when he made his move, it really shocked the entire place, and everyone looked at him in a new light. But after this unfamiliar senior sister asked, Lin Jingyu for a moment did not know how to answer and could not speak. Wen Min had always been kind-hearted, seeing that half of Lin Jingyu's body was bleeding, and taking advantage of the rare opportunity, she helped him bandage his wound. Just as the situation was urgent, she casually bandaged it and then said in a low voice, "There will be another fierce battle later. Be careful yourself." Lin Jingyu's heart warmed. He nodded and said in a low voice, "Thank you, senior sister." Wen Min smiled, walked to one side and stood beside Lu Sueki. Lu Sueki turned to look at Lin Jingyu. Her face expressionless, but a glint seemed to flash past her eyes. In front of Chang Shenhal, Yu Yangzi's face was grave and stern, his only remaining right hand tightly gripped the magical weapon, Yin Yang Mirror. The veins on his hand popped out. This time they launched a surprise attack on Good Faction. Unexpectedly, they were made a fool of by these Good Faction juniors. He roughly glanced over. In this short period of time, Changshan Hall had already lost 1/3 of their men, and on the Good Faction side, there were almost no casualties. Lin Jingyu was slashed several times and seemed to be the one with the heaviest injuries. Li Sun at this moment looked at the evil faction Changshan Hall people, his eyes glinting. Suddenly, in a low voice said, "Xiao Senior Brother really has divine foresight. I am impressed." Xiao Yikai smiled and said, "It is just a coincidence. In future, there will be many places where I will need to rely on Li Senior Brother. I hope Li Senior Brother will not be stingy with your guidance." Li Sun obviously did not dare to belittle Xiao Yikai anymore, nodded and said, "I dare not." Fa Xiang's eyes instead paused for a moment on the injured Lin Jingyu, seemed to have the intention to go over and comfort him, but eventually still resisted. Ever since Qingyun's sect and Tianyin Temple people met up, both sides got along well, but only Lin Jingyu alone in Qingyun's sect was always extremely cold towards the Tianyin Temple monks. To investigate the reason, everyone naturally understood in their hearts, just that the scars of the past, no one was willing to bring it up again. So all along, it was the Tianyin Temple monks who had been intentionally or unintentionally avoiding Lin Jingyu. But now seeing Lin Jingyu injured, Fa Xiang was still concerned, turned to Xiao Yikai and quietly said, "Xiao Senior Brother, your Lin Jingyu Junior Brother's injury is not serious, right?" Xiao Yikai had already seen Wen Min helping Lin Jingyu to bandage his wounds. Right now he glanced at Wen Min. Wen Min understood and shook her head slightly. Xiao Yikai then felt relieved, said to Fa Xiang, "Lin Junior Brother is not serious. Fa Xiang Senior Brother, do not worry." Fa Xiang lowered his head and put his palms together, softly chanted. Xiao Yikai took a deep breath, looked ahead, said in a clear voice, "Yu Yangzi Senior, no matter what you are still a senior. Changshan Hall is one of the 4 great evil faction branches. How can you use such despicable methods? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at by the world?" Yu Yangzi was enraged, said, "You all these so-called famous good faction, didn't you also ambush us and still dare to boast shamelessly here?" Xiao Yikai's expression did not even change. With awe-inspiring righteousness, said, "We are the younger generation, and also outside. Naturally, we have to be careful to guard against the treacherous villains secretly harming us. Unexpectedly, this weight is actually..." This Xiao Yikai's age was far younger than Yu Yangzi, but his tongue was sharp. With just a few words, he made Yu Yangzi seething with anger. With a loud roar, he was the first to pounce. The Changshan Hall disciples behind saw their leader making a move and also followed. Xiao Yikai and the few with outstanding skills blocked Yu Yangzi. The rest of them started to fight again. Originally, with Yu Yangzi's cultivation temperament, he would not be so easily provoked by Xiao Yikai. Just that Changshan Hall's remaining bit of strength was now wasted. He was extremely heartbroken and furious. Xiao Yikai's scolding did not use any vulgar words. Every sentence was sarcastic, even though Meng Ji, who was beside him, was still a little clear-headed and was about to dissuade him. Yu Yangzi had already dashed out. Yu Yangzi was able to hold the position of Changshan Hall leader for as long as 100 years. Naturally, he had real talent. Even if he lost his left arm in the Qingyun battle 10 years ago and his skills were greatly damaged, with just Xiao Yikai alone, he would definitely not be his match. But this kind of one-on-one fight naturally would not happen. Xiao Yikai in the middle, Fa Xiang on the left, Li Sun on the right. These 3 most outstanding good faction, young generation intercepted Yu Yangzi and fought together. Yu Yangzi mustered his divine might. With one arm, he fought 1 against 3. The Yin Yang mirror magical weapon in his hand was miraculous and unpredictable, alternating between black and white, bursts of mysterious light. The magical weapons that Xiao Yikai and the rest attacked with were either blocked by this precious mirror or pulled by Yu Yangzi to one side, totally unable to get close. What's more, when the white side of the Yin Yang mirror flipped over, it would reflect their magical weapons back to their owners. The three of them did not expect this magical weapon to have such a marvelous function and almost suffered a great loss. Li Sun's left arm was even grazed by his own magical weapon, Jiuyang Qi, and almost became a one-armed person like Yu Yangzi in front of him. This time the three of them did not dare to be careless and carefully dealt with it. Yu Yangzi fought 1 against 3, and facing these 3 outstanding good faction talents, he still had the upper hand. His skills were really outstanding. Just that although Yu Yangzi himself was powerful, but the skills of his subordinates were too far from his. Facing this group of good faction disciples with outstanding aptitude and magical weapons, even though they outnumbered them, they instead gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. Chapter 177. Other than those monks from Tian'an Temple who struck lightly, Qin Yun's sect and the evil faction's enmity was as deep as the sea. Their disciples were all vicious, and Funxiang Valley did not lose out to Qin Yun's sect by much. Yu Yangzi was entangled by these 3 people, although he had the upper hand, but for the moment he could not extricate himself. Looking around in the midst of the fierce battle, other than Meng Ji and a few others who were bitterly holding on, the rest of the ordinary disciples had gradually lost their will to fight. More than half of them were dead or injured. Meng Ji, with one move, forced a Funxiang Valley disciple to retreat. His face revealed anxiety and loudly called out to Yu Yangzi, sect leader. Yu Yangzi gritted his teeth, extremely resentful, but he finally knew that the situation was hopeless. If they continued to fight, Changshan Hall's last bit of foundation would be used up here. He could only loudly shout, "Everyone retreat first. I will hold up the rear." Once he said that, the Changshan Hall disciples one after another fled into the darkness behind them. How alert were the good faction, Xiao, Yikai, and the rest. At the same time exerted their strength. Various magical weapons glimmered and immediately pounced towards Yu Yangzi. Yu Yangzi gave a loud roar and did not evade. The yin-yang mirror spun rapidly in midair and actually charged up. Dang, it blocked the reincarnation pearl that was controlled by Xiangzi. In an instant it turned from black to white. Xiao Yikai's body shook. The 7-star sword dancing in midair suddenly lost control and turned back to attack. The sword force swift and fierce. For a moment he was flustered. He continuously casted his spells and finally regained control of the 7-star sword. In just this short period of time, Yu Yangzi had already pulled Li Sun's Jiuyang ruler to one side. The 3 good factions' attack was halted, but Yu Yangzi did not take the opportunity to escape. Instead, he leapt up and landed in the crowd. The other good faction disciples were chasing after the fleeing Changshan Hall disciples and were caught off guard by Yu Yangzi's sudden attack. Tung, a few sounds. Immediately a number of them were severely injured, and a few more were hit by the yin-yang mirror's great force, flew out and landed in the darkness, suddenly cried out in alarm, and a moment later there was no more sound. Most likely they had landed in this bottomless pit and lost their lives. In the night, Yu Yangzi alone could be seen moving about disdainfully, killing left and right in the crowd, covering the Changshan Hall disciples as they escaped. Wherever he went, in front of the yin-yang mirror's black and white light, the good faction disciples all retreated, really unexcelled in the world. And far away, a few indistinct figures standing in the darkness were also concentrating on the situation, especially staring intently at Yu Yangzi, who was displaying his prowess. With Yu Yangzi's onslaught, the pressure on the Changshan Hall disciples immediately lessened, and in a blink more than half of them retreated, leaving a ground full of corpses. Yu Yangzi looked at it and felt a wave of heartache. But at this moment, the good faction Xiao Yikai and the rest had already caught up, adding Qin Yun's sect Xavian, Zheng Shu, Wen Min, Tian'an Temple Fashion, Funxiang Valley Yanhong, and the rest, a total of 8 of them, their magical weapons all out, surrounded Yu Yangzi and attacked. Yu Yangzi gave a fierce howl. The killing was aroused. The ferocity in his character was displayed one by one. There was not a trace of fear. The yin-yang mirror flipped and danced, blocking left and right, leading the counterattack, clashing with those 8 people, fighting from the ground to midair and again from midair back to the ground. Just that the good faction had the advantage in numbers and their skills were not low. No matter how powerful Yu Yangzi was, he was ultimately outnumbered and the momentum of the yin-yang mirror was gradually suppressed. The 8 good faction people leaped and leaped, their coordination gradually becoming more and more tacit. Although it was not a good sight to see 8 people besieging one, but as long as they added in their hearts that this was the evil faction's great evil head, naturally they would have a clear conscience. Every move was fatal, aiming for that vital point. But Yu Yangzi's hundreds of years of painstaking cultivation, how could he be ordinary under the sabers and sword shadows? Although he gradually lost the ability to retaliate and the surrounding pressure also increased, but no matter how Xiao Yikai and the rest attacked, they could not penetrate the black and white light of his yin-yang mirror. And his body moved, indistinctly leading the battle, drifting to the side, if not for the fact that Xiao Yikai was really quick-witted and suddenly remembered that his sect disciples had just lost their lives. He loudly shouted out, careful not to fall into the swamp. Only then did he remind the rest. The next moment they discovered that unknowingly, they had already been secretly led by Yu Yangzi to the side of the bottomless pit. If one was not careful, someone would fall in. It was really dangerous. Yu Yangzi, in the midst of the chaotic battle, still had this kind of foresight, this kind of experience. Naturally, these juniors could not compare to. Unfortunately, even if he had more experience and his cultivation was extremely high, facing this group of highly skilled, talented, outstanding magical weapons, and among them there was a young expert with such foresight, he was also helpless. The 8 people led by Xiao Yikai exerted their strength at the same time. In that instant, numerous strange lights struck towards the yin-yang mirror in Yu Yangzi's hand. Yu Yangzi's body shook greatly. He felt the heavy pressure, like toppling the mountains and overturning the seas. Wave after wave, the opponent could take a short rest after exerting their strength, but he could only keep on blocking and was unable to retaliate. After blocking for more than 10 times, he finally could not withstand it and could only retreat, gradually distancing himself from the bottomless pit. After leaving the bottomless pit, the good faction immediately felt at ease and attacked Yu Yangzi even more freely. Yu Yangzi gradually found it strenuous. The corner of his eyes glanced around and saw that in this short period of time, most of the Changshun Hall disciples had already retreated. Mengji and a few others were rushing over to his side to provide support, but at the side, there were even more good faction disciples surrounding him. Yu Yangzi's heart turned cold. He knew that if he was surrounded by these 20 to 30 people, no matter how skilled he was, he would lose his life here. Immediately he blocked Zheng Shushu's Xianyuan sword, which was attacking from the front, and shouted, "All of you quickly leave." Meng Ji and the rest were stunned and immediately turned and fled. Yu Yangzi did not wish to prolong the battle. The yin-yang mirror in his hand flashed again and again. Suddenly the white light surged, the magnificent light dazzling. In an instant, the 5 magical weapons that were attacking him were all rebounded back by him and returned to attack their owners. The good faction did not expect him to have such ability and immediately fell into chaos. A small opening appeared in their formation. What kind of experience was Yu Yangzi? His body immediately turned into a strange light, like lightning dashed over. His body had just moved, and the next moment he was already beside that opening. It looked like he was about to rush out. Xiao Yikai and the rest were further behind him and would not be able to catch up. But at this moment, the jade green light suddenly shone, dazzling and brilliant. The dragon slayer sword arrived ferociously, chopping down. Looking at this momentum, it looked like it was really going to chop Yu Yangzi into 2. Yu Yangzi was caught off guard, but in this life and death juncture, he still forcefully shifted his body 3 inches to the right. That jade green light chopped down straight from his side. His sleeves fluttered and was cut into pieces by this jade green light. Yu Yangzi's left arm was already broken, and right now he instead had the advantage. If not under this severe pain, it was unknown whether he could maintain his composure. But the left side of his body was burning with pain. Most likely he was still injured by this dragon slayer sword's jade green light. His body did not stop. His right hand had already flipped over. The yin-yang mirror immediately flashed with black light and struck out horizontally. A muffled groan was heard. Lin Jingyu staggered backwards. The bandaged wounds on his body split open. Fresh blood spurted out again. Right now, there were no more good faction disciples blocking his way. Yu Yangzi was delighted and was about to exert his strength. At the same time, he cursed in his heart. Today he suffered the humiliation from these good faction juniors. In the future, he will definitely avenge them 100-fold. Above the death marsh, suddenly a shocking sound of thunder exploded. Everyone looked sideways. A ray of resplendent blue light streaked across the horizon. The dark clouds in the sky like ink swirled rapidly. Like a ferocious whirlpool, Anan stood in midair. The fierce wind was biting cold on her peerless face, like ice and frost. Far away in the darkness, there seemed to be someone's body slightly trembling. That beautiful lady stood in midair, took 7 steps in the air, her mouth chanting. Instantly lightning flashed in the horizon, like an enormous snake shuttling between the clouds. Yu Yangzi's expression changed greatly, but before he could react, Anan's celestial sword-wield Thunder True incantation was already activated. The enormous lightning in the horizon came crashing down, struck Tianya's sword tip. The blue light brightened. In a moment lit up half of the sky. The dark clouds were heavy. At this moment, Anan no longer had the strength she had when she was sparring with Zhang Xiaofan. The sky full of lightning reflected in her pupils, as if she had returned to the past. The enormous light pillar refracted down before it reached the ground. The good faction disciples beside her had already retreated, within several zhangs of Yu Yangzi. The fierce wind howled. The trees and water plants were uprooted. The power was astonishing. Yu Yangzi gave a long whistle. All of his clothes bulged up. The yin-yang mirror floated up, shooting out 2 strange black and white lights, instantly merged into one. Obviously, after the fierce battle, Yu Yangzi had used all of his strength, risking his life to resist. Boom! The enormous light pillar struck onto Yu Yangzi's yin-yang mirror. In a moment, Yu Yangzi's body was pressed into the ground. A painful expression flashed past Yu Yangzi's face, but Anan's body in the sky suddenly shook. Her face also turned pale. But that enormous light pillar did not diminish from Tianya's celestial sword. Lightning flashed chaotically, fiercely striking down. Yu Yangzi supported with one arm, his face turning uglier and uglier, if not for the fact that the celestial sword-wield Thunder True incantation's power was too great and the good faction disciples could not interfere. Otherwise, if the thousands of swords fell together, Yu Yangzi would have turned into minced meat in a blink. Yu Yangzi's eyes were filled with hatred. The muscles at the back of his neck twisted. He bit down with all his might, bit his tongue, and spat out a mouthful of blood on the yin-yang mirror. For some reason, the yin-yang mirror immediately shone brightly and forcefully pushed back Anan's enormous light pillar. Xiao Yangzi and the rest saw something was amiss and pounced forward. Yu Yangzi, with a shrill howl, flew up. The yin-yang mirror swiftly swept behind him. The yin-yang mirror, which was activated by his own blood, surged with vigor. Xiao Yangzi and the rest did not dare to take it head-on and all retreated. Although Yu Yangzi's move was powerful, but it could be seen that after such an intense battle and using such a vicious strange skill, his vitality was greatly sapped and even his steps staggered a few times. But this person was really outstanding. Even under such circumstances, he still forced himself to take a breath and flew away, finally disappearing into the darkness. Li Sun and the rest still wanted to give chase. Xiao Yangzi instantly weighed the pros and cons and loudly stopped them, said, "Don't chase a cornered enemy. Danger lurks everywhere in the death marsh, and we are not familiar with it. It's best to be careful." Li Sun, although was unwilling, but tonight Xiao Yangzi's foresight was like a deity. He really admired him and finally stopped. This night, this battle finally ended with the evil sect Chang Shunhal's crushing defeat. Just that the good faction and evil faction fighting. The good faction also suffered some losses, but compared to Chang Shunhal, it was much better. Chapter 178. The night was as dark as ink, cold and austere. Suddenly, a beam of light streaked past in the darkness, swiftly approaching from afar, but looking from afar, that light seemed to be trembling indistinctly, showing signs of instability. On the ground, Meng Ji was anxiously pacing back and forth. Behind him were the remaining Chang Shunhal disciples. Roughly looking, there were about 50 to 60 of them, each of them with a terrified expression, looking towards the direction they came from, until they saw that beam of light. There was a commotion among the ordinary disciples. Quite a number of them cheered. Meng Ji instead looked at that figure flying over. His anxious expression became even more serious. That beam of light reached near and stopped. Yu Yangzi floated down to the ground. Immediately the crowd shouted, "Sect leader, sect leader." Unexpectedly, before the crowd could rush up, Yu Yongzi's face turned pale. With a sound, he spat out a mouthful of blood, staining the front of his clothes. Everyone turned pale. Meng Ji dashed forward and supported Yu Yongzi. His hands were cold to the touch. He felt that Yu Yongzi's entire body was icy cold, extremely unusual, and under his clothes, his body was still trembling slightly. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. Yu Yongzi felt Meng Ji's shock. His gaze swept left and right and saw that the rest of the disciples also had terrified expressions. He knew that these people were already like birds startled by the mere twang of a bough. The morale of the army was in chaos. If he could not hold on, it would immediately be a situation of monkeys scattering when the tree falls. Immediately he roused his spirits, suppressed the churning blood in his chest, and said in a clear voice, "All you don't need to panic. Just now I used my own strength to force out the clotted blood in my body. It is not a big deal." Usually in the hearts of Changshan Hall disciples, Yu Yongzi was like a deity. Now that he said that, it seemed to have some effect. Many of the disciples' expressions eased, evidently much more at ease. Just that although Yu Yongzi said so, his face was really too poor, as white as paper, and the left side of his body was covered in blood. Even his sleeves were nowhere to be seen, looking extremely wretched. Luckily, it was now late at night. The night was thick, if not during the day. With hundreds of gazes looking over, they would immediately see that he was already an arrow at the end of its flight. Meng Ji frowned tightly and immediately turned back to the Changshan Hall disciples and shouted, "Sect leader is fine. All of you go to one side and rest first. We will make further plans after daybreak." The crowd followed his instructions and gradually dispersed. When the Changshan Hall people had walked further away, Meng Ji suddenly felt Yu Yongzi's body suddenly sank and quickly supported him. He looked at Yu Yongzi and his heart almost jumped out, only to see that Yu Yongzi's face did not have a trace of blood, panting heavily. If not for her supporting him, he would have almost collapsed. Meng Ji quickly helped Yu Yongzi to sit down. Yu Yongzi meditated on the ground and slowly inhaled and exhaled. After a long while, his breathing gradually calmed down and his complexion looked better. In the meantime, Meng Ji had been standing beside Yu Yongzi. His expression was anxious and worried. At the same time, he kept looking around. It was deep into the night, and other than the small bonfire made by the disciples of Changshan Hall, it was pitch black everywhere. The night was ferocious, as if it was also spying on Changshan Hall, this faction that was in dire straits. Yu Yongzi slowly opened his eyes. Meng Ji immediately asked in a low voice, "Sect leader, are you all right?" Yu Yongzi laughed bitterly. In his eyes, naturally he could not compare Meng Ji with those ordinary disciples. He sighed slightly and said, "I was besieged by those good faction brats just now and expended a lot of my vitality. Afterwards, there was actually a lady who displayed Qing Yun Sek's celestial sword-wield Thunder True formula." Meng Ji's countenance changed greatly and said in shock, "There was actually such a skilled person among them?" Yu Yongzi hatefully said, "Not only that, I fought with several of them, and there were at least 3 or 4 of them whose skills were extraordinarily high. In the end, I could only display Blood Curse, and only then could I force my way out." Meng Ji's countenance changed again. Blood Curse was Changshan Hall's famous true spell evil curse. It could instantly increase one's skills, but the backlash afterwards was extremely frightening. Not to mention the great damage to one's skills. Most likely it would also shorten one's young lifespan. After being stunned for a while, Meng Ji then regained his senses and said to Yu Yongzi, "Sect leader, then what is our plan now?" Yu Yongzi's countenance was solemn. After a moment of silence, he hatefully said, "Now the arrow is already on the bowstring. We have no choice but to release it. After daybreak, we will immediately head deeper into the Death Marsh and enter the Inner Marsh to search for treasures." Meng Ji's countenance changed greatly and could not help but said, "Sect leader." Yu Yongzi waved his hand and stopped Meng Ji's words, said, "I know what you want to say, but now that we have withdrawn from the Death Marsh, sooner or later we will die in the hands of the other 3 great sects. Why not take this gamble?" Meng Ji stared blankly at Yu Yongzi and saw that his pale face was even more vicious. He guessed that he could not persuade him anymore and could only slowly stand up, looked up at the sky, and sighed softly in his heart. This enormous death marsh, located in the southwest of the vast divine continent, had a circumference of 8,000 miles and was unbroken. Since ancient times, it had rarely been inhabited, and it was divided into two boundaries. One was the outer marsh, which was where everyone was now. It belonged to the outer periphery of the Death Marsh and took up 70 to 80% of the Death Marsh. It was densely filled with bottomless mud pits and numerous poisonous insects, but to cultivators, they did not take it to heart. As long as they were careful and did not step wrongly, it would not be a big problem. And in the deepest part of the Death Marsh, there was another mysterious place. It was a place that was surrounded by poisonous marsh gas all year round, and no one knew what it looked like inside. Occasionally, there would be cultivators who went in to explore, but there was no sign of life. Therefore, both the good and evil faction were not willing to rashly enter. In these few days, numerous people were searching for treasures in the Death Marsh, but until now, there was no news. Yu Yangzi had long guessed in his heart that the treasure would most likely be in the most dangerous and unpredictable inner marsh. If it was normal days, Yu Yangzi might have many misgivings and would at least prepare carefully for many days. But now that the situation was pressing, he himself was like a gambler who was anxious and could not care about anything else. The night breeze blew past. The Changshan Hall disciples who had been busy fighting for a day had mostly fallen asleep. The fire on the ground also gradually extinguished. Yu Yangzi was still meditating with his head lowered. Meng Ji, who was standing beside him just now, by now most likely had gone to the disciples' side. Suddenly, Yu Yangzi abruptly opened his eyes, his gaze fierce, but also seemed to have a trace of fear as he looked around. The night was deep, darkness pervaded. All the muscles in his body suddenly tightened, and then he slowly stood up. His only hand tightly gripped the yin-yang mirror. The cold wind penetrated his bones, blowing on his body, as if the cold reached his heart. Deep in the darkness, footsteps gradually sounded. Pa, 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 sha, 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 hua, 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 as if carrying their own different rhythms. At the same time, from three directions, light but orderly footsteps converged towards Changshan Hall. For the first time, a trace of despair appeared on Yu Yangzi's face. He suddenly shouted, "Bastard, get out for me." This loud shout, in a forceful but indistinctly lacking in energy, but it still reverberated far in this swamp, immediately startled the Changshan Hall disciples far away from their sleep. In the midst of their cries, they hurriedly crawled up and swiftly gathered together. Yu Yangzi's expression was uncertain. His heart could not help but sink. He turned around and was suddenly stunned, loudly asked, "Where is Meng Ji? Where did he go?" The Changshan Hall disciples looked at each other. For a long time no one answered. Obviously, they did not know. Yu Yangzi's anger surged up. A wave of dizziness hit his head, and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood again. And at this moment, suddenly a gentle male voice was heard from the darkness, harmoniously said, "Yu Yang, teacher, uncle, could it be that you are looking for this person?" Whoa! An object flew out from the darkness in front of Changshan Hall, streaked across in an arc, and landed in front of Yu Yangzi and the Changshan Hall disciples, rolling a few times. Someone at the side had already lit a torch. Under the illumination of the fire, suddenly exclaimed, it was the severed head of Meng Ji who was standing there talking to the crowd just now. His eyes were wide open, but there was a horrified expression in his eyes. Most likely he died with remaining grievances. Yu Yangzi took a deep breath. His eyes shifted away from his last capable subordinate's severed head, stared ahead, and coldly said, "Qin Wuyan." A young man slowly walked out, his face slightly pale, but there was a gentle smile on his face. He smiled and said, "Teacher, uncle indeed has outstanding eyesight. Little nephew was standing in the dark, and you can still recognize me. Admirable, admirable." Yu Yangzi's expression was as ugly as it could be. He coldly said, "Consider yourself ruthless, but your Wandu clan treated your holy sect fellow disciples in such a manner. That old poison teacher of yours, isn't he afraid that after his death he will be sent to hell by heaven demon Ming Wang?" "Ah." Qin Mian pressed his hand on his chest, pretending to be frightened, but his face was smiling and peaceful, without a trace of fear. He turned his head to the other side and said, Jin Shinzi, such a heavy crime. Our Wandu clan does not dare to shoulder it alone. Are you still not coming out? Yu Yangzi's countenance changed greatly. He abruptly turned his head and saw in the darkness on the left side. A graceful lady indeed slowly walked out. Her eyes and brows were full of amorous feelings in this dark night. The moment she walked out, it immediately seemed to brighten up a few notches. Jean Pinger. Yu Yangzi sounded as if he was gritting his teeth as he said these three words. Jean Pinger smiled sweetly and said, Yu Yangzi, teacher uncle, long time no see. How have you been all along? This greeting was even more venomous than the most venomous curse. Yu Yangzi stared intently at her and coldly said, Our Changshan Hall has always minded our own business with Yihuan's sect. Why must you join hands with those fellows from Wandu clan to hit us when we are down? Jean Pinger smiled and said, You are really forgetful. A few days ago, after you found out that I came to the Death Marsh, worried that our Yihuan sect would snatch your treasures from you, you ordered your men to kill Wandu clan disciples and snatch our sect's unique poison, black toad powder, and then used this poison to kill 4 of our Yihuan sect disciples at the north of Great King Village. Is there such matter? Yu Yangzi's countenance changed. He involuntarily said, Why did you? Speaking halfway, he immediately stopped. Jean Pinger indifferently said, Teacher uncle, you have a deep and far-sighted plan to incite our Yihuan sect and Wandu clan to fight. It is indeed brilliant. Just that thanks to Qin Huiyan's senior brother being reasonable and meticulous in investigating, we finally found out the truth. If not, we would really be harmed by you. Qin Huiyan smiled and said, What is fairy saying? To be able to be of fairy's service, it is my honor. Chapter 179. Yu Yangzi's thoughts turned rapidly. The situation was dangerous on all sides. Although these 2 people were young, but these few years their reputation had spread far and wide, they were definitely not easy to deal with, and there were many figures behind them. Although they did not show themselves, but most likely it was Wandu clan, Yihuan sect's large group of people lying in ambush. If it was so, most likely he would really be doomed tonight. Yu Yangzi's thoughts turned rapidly. Suddenly he heard a commotion among the disciples behind him. As if they saw something terrifying, he quickly turned around and looked. Immediately his face turned pale. The only escape route behind him. In the darkness, an indifferent ghostly slowly walked out. At this moment, Yu Yangzi's thoughts turned. He already understood and finally despaired, laughed bitterly and said, So the 3 of you have already agreed to deal with my Changshan Hall together. Laughable that I still wanted to sow discord among you. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind. Qin Huiyan smiled and suddenly said in a clear voice, All Changshan Hall disciples, you have also seen, tonight Changshan Hall's fate has come to an end. If you know what's good for you, quickly come over to our side, and you can still keep your lives. Following his words, behind Qin Huiyan, Jean Pinger, and Ghostly, human figures floated. Numerous people wielding magical weapons and sharp blades surged out from the darkness, surrounding the group, led by Yu Yangzi and the rest. The night breeze blew lightly, the hero's end. The Changshan Hall disciples looked at each other. Right now, anyone could tell that if they continued to fight, only death awaited them. Surrounded by the evil sect's 3 great aristocratic families, they were also at the end of their rope. How could they still have a chance of survival? Yu Yangzi's heart cursed, and indeed, after a short while, someone shouted, I surrender, I surrender. Speaking, he ran out and ran toward Qin Huiyan. Someone took the lead, and immediately the crowd stirred. In a short while, almost everyone ran out. After all, no one was willing to wait for death. Yu Yangzi was shocked and angry, repeatedly shouted for them to stop, but at this life and death juncture, who could care about him? More and more Changshan Hall disciples ran out. The situation was out of control and could not be stopped. Yu Yangzi's chest was filled with anger. His eyes revealed a ferocious glint. With a loud roar, he leapt into the crowd and casually grabbed a Changshan Hall disciple, intending to kill to establish his power. The crowd saw this and, with a shout, ran even faster, only that unlucky fellow in his hand was so frightened that his body went limp. Yu Yangzi's face was ferocious, looking at the hundreds of years of Changshan Hall's foundation destroyed in a day. His chest almost exploded with anger. His hand exerted strength and wanted to strangle the disciple to death, but that disciple was terrified to the extreme, almost unable to even make sound. Yu Yangzi looked at him and suddenly turned his head back to look at his disciple who was running away. Suddenly he was disheartened. His hand loosened and that disciple fell to the ground. That person barely escaped with his life. He almost couldn't believe his own eyes. He hurriedly rolled and crawled away, trying to get as far away from this person as possible. After a while, there was only Yu Yangzi left alone. Ghostly, Qin Wuyin, and Jean Pinger walked forward together. The scene suddenly quietened down. Yu Yangzi's figure was desolate. His eyes swept across from Qin Wuyin to Jean Pinger and then to Ghostly. His lips moved and suddenly said, "Forget it, forget it." Ghostly and the rest walked until they were about 1 zhang away from Yu Yangzi and stopped. The three of them formed a circle, encircling Yu Yangzi in the middle. Jean Pinger was the first to speak, smiled and said, "What is it? Yu Yangzi, teacher uncle, do you still have anything to say?" A venomous glint flashed past Yu Yangzi's eyes, but his face was indifferent. After a moment he slowly said, "Now that I am at the end of my rope, Chang Shunhal's name will end today." Qin Wuyin clapped his hands and said, "Teacher uncle really has good eyesight." Yu Yangzi's body trembled. What kind of person was he, but today he had to suffer the humiliation of these juniors? It was really a fate worse than death, but he actually endured it. Slowly said, "Since I have no other way to go, fine, I will also surrender to you all. With my skills, I can still be considered to be of some use to you all, right?" Once he said those words, Qin Wuyin and Jean Pinger were immediately moved. Yu Yangzi's skills were not below Ghost King, God of Poison. Especially tonight, he had fought alone against 10 of the most outstanding good faction figures. The evil faction people who were secretly watching from afar were all moved. If not for the fact that Chang Shenhal and good faction had a fierce battle to eliminate Chang Shenhal, most likely it would not be so simple. And if they could obtain Yu Yangzi's help, needless to say, he would definitely be the #1 strong support in the future evil faction internal strife. Naturally, they would have a great advantage. Thinking of this, Qin Wuyin and Jean Pinger were both ambitious people. They could not help but had hesitation on their faces. And at this moment, Ghostly, who had been silent, suddenly said, "Your skills are so high, your ambition is so big, and your seniority is higher than us. If you come to our Ghost King sect, I'm afraid in the future will be you who will be above me. This kind of thing, are you willing?" His words were indifferent, but his sharp eyes coldly swept across Yu Yangzi. Yu Yangzi's heart turned cold. Qin Wuyin and Jean Pinger were both intelligent people. In a blink they had already understood this point. A smile immediately appeared on their faces. But in Yu Yangzi's eyes, it was no different from a ghost. Teacher uncle is really smart. At this moment you still have such a brilliant idea. Admirable, admirable. Jean Pinger smiled sweetly, but at the same time, at her right hand, the purple light gradually brightened. Similarly, almost at the same time, Ghostly's soul-absorbing stick and Qin Wuyin both took a step forward towards Yu Yangzi. The night wind rustled, chilling to the bones. Yu Yangzi looked around, his heart suddenly filled with hatred. With a long howl, he stood up and made his last struggle, absolutely not willing to resign himself to death. Far away, the good faction had just settled down. This time, Xiao Yikai specially sent a few more junior brothers to keep watch. It could be seen that his thoughts were meticulous. At a secluded place, Anan sat quietly at the side. After a while, one man came back, sat beside her, pouted slightly, whispered to her, "That Xavion is really a big fool." Lu Sueki's eyes moved, looked afar, saw Xavion sitting beside the fire, looking embarrassed, not knowing what he had said to one min. From time to time, he would sneak glances over, looking anxious but not daring to come over. A trace of smile surfaced in Anan's eyes. She said to one min, "Senior sister, you have bullied him for so many years. It's rare for you to come out. Better treat him better." One min snorted. She and Anan had always been close and had never hidden anything from his junior sister. She lightly snorted and said, "That person is just too honest. I really don't know what is going on with Tian Bui Tian teacher uncle. At that time I heard he seduced Suru teacher uncle from our small bamboo valley. No, when he married her, he was extremely quick-witted. How come his disciples are all so stupid?" Anan smiled and looked away. After a while, she suddenly quietly said, "You are right, they're Big Bamboo Valley disciples. At that time there were many honest ones, speaking till the end, for some reason." Her voice gradually became softer. One man was stunned for a moment, looked at Anan and suddenly sighed, gently patted her shoulder and said, "Don't think too much." Anan did not speak, only lowered her head and did not speak. This night quietly passed by. After daybreak, Xiao Yikai gathered everyone and discussed. Now that Changshan Hall's vitality is greatly damaged, we temporarily have no external enemies. And we have searched this death marsh for many days, but regarding that treasure, there is still no news at all. Not sure if fellow senior brothers. What do you think? Fa Xiang was silent. Li Sun instead looked at Xiao Yikai and said, "Xiao senior brother, don't tell me you were thinking of entering that extremely dangerous inner marsh to investigate?" Xiao Yikai was slightly surprised and then nodded and said, "That's right. Since we are already here, we can't just give up halfway." Fa Xiang frowned and said, "Although what Xiao senior brother said is reasonable, but deep in the death marsh, the marsh gas is extremely poisonous. Heard that there are even more unimaginable evil beasts and poisonous insects inside. It is extremely dangerous. So many of us going together is really too dangerous." Xiao Yikai immediately nodded and continued, "That's right, what Fa Xiang senior brother said is exactly what I am worried about. So I think, why don't we let the majority of the junior brothers continue to search the outer marsh? The few of us, together with a few more highly skilled disciples, enter the inner marsh. What do both of you think?" Li Sun was silent for a while, nodded and said, "We can only do so." Fa Xiang also silently nodded. After the discussion was completed, each went back to discuss the candidates. Not long after, Funxiang Valley was Li Sun, Yanhong, Tianyin Temple was Fa Xiang, Fashion. As for Qingyun sect, there were slightly more people, other than Xiao Yikai. Lu Sueki and Zheng Shushu were in the list, and the one who was in the limelight last night, Ling Jingyu, under his strong request. In addition to the fact that everyone had a whole new level of respect for him. In the end, he was also in the list. As such, the 8 of them, after making arrangements for their own sects, with Xiao Yikai leading the way, they all rode their magical weapons and headed toward the inner marsh. And on the other side of the marsh, looking at the tranquil marsh ahead, Ghostly and the rest of them stood side by side. Behind them were 3 rows of people, each in a group, but also facing each other, indistinctly with vigilance. Qin Huiyin suddenly sighed and said, "Yu Yangzi teacher uncle was a hero of a generation. Now that he has entered this death marsh, it could be considered as a worthy death, right?" Ghostly was silent. Jean Pinger faintly smiled and also did not speak. Qin Huiyin did not mind, smiled and said, "How is it? What are the 2 of you preparing to do next?" Jean Pinger glanced at him and suddenly turned. While walking, she said, "The important matter is over. Naturally, we should part ways." Qin Huiyin looked at her back, raised his voice, and said, "Oh, don't tell me Fairy is going back to report?" Jean Pinger did not speak much, smiled indifferently. Qin Huiyin then said, "Then I will be in the inner marsh, waiting respectfully for Fairy. When the time comes, I will have to ask Jean Fairy to show mercy." Not knowing if Jean Pinger heard or not, she minded her own business and walked far away. The Hehuan sect disciples also followed her and dispersed. Ghostly glanced at Qin Huiyin, his gaze cold, and then also turned and walked back to the Ghost King sect people. Qin Huiyin stood at his original position, smiled and did not speak, but his gaze also gradually turned cold. In the death marsh, the sky turned gloomier, dark clouds gathered densely, as if an even bigger storm was coming again. Chapter 180. The wind blew past the death marsh. Water plants swayed beneath their feet, ripples formed on the water surface, as far as the eye could see, although there were no signs of human habitation, but it was a different kind of moving scenery. The soul-absorbing stick emitted a faint dark green light. The faint light swirled and stopped in the air. Ghostly was on it, his hands clasped behind his back, staring ahead. This day, it was a rare good weather in the death marsh. Under the warm sunlight, the gloomy air had dissipated a lot, but just several zhongs in front of him, there was a thick gray miasma like fog, rising majestically, extending to the left and right, so high that its peak could not be seen, intertwining with each other, as if there was no end in sight. This was one of the most dangerous places in the world, the Death Marsh's inner marsh. The monkey Xiao Hui, who was crouching on his shoulder, also seemed to be uneasy and quietly called out. Ghostly stretched out his hand and gently patted Xiao Hui. Xiao Hui quieted down. A pair of intelligent eyes looked at the miasma ahead. Just at this moment, a whistling sound was heard from behind. A bright light like lightning shot over. Ghost Li's figure moved. The soul-absorbing stick seemed to know his intention and slowly turned over. That bright light abruptly stopped in front of him. A young man came through the air, his eyebrows straight to his temples, his eyes bright and sharp. In a flash he appeared in front of Ghostly, bowed and said, "Vice Sect Head, everything has been arranged." Ghostly did not ask him what the matter was. Most likely he already knew it. He nodded slightly and said, "Good. Then I will leave this place to you." After speaking, he seemed to recall something and said, "Yin Hui." That man called Yin Hui said what? Ghostly glanced behind him and said, "You have always been calm. I am very assured, but Kill the Living Monk has an explosive temper, and his killing nature is too heavy. Now that all the powers in the Death Marsh are gathered, all the more he cannot act rashly. You must restrain him well." Yin Hui smiled and said, "Vice Sect Head, don't worry. Although Kill the Living Monk is arrogant, but he has never dared to disobey your orders, I will also restrain him." Ghostly glanced at him, nodded his head, and was about to turn when Yin Hui suddenly said, "Vice Sect Head, there is one more thing." Ghostly looked at him. Yin Hui pondered for a moment, urged the magical weapon beneath his feet, neared Ghostly, and at the same time lowered his voice. "Just now I received news from the headquarters. Qing Long and Zhuke Sr., the four great holy envoys. A few days ago they suddenly headed towards the direction of the Death Marsh." Ghostly's countenance changed slightly but then returned to normal. After a moment of silence said, "There is no need to announce this matter. All of you carry on as usual, quietly observe the changes." Yin Hui lowered his head and said, "Yes." After speaking, he bowed to Ghostly and turned around. Ghostly watched Yin Hui's figure disappear, unhurriedly turn around. His eyes again landed on the huge miasma. After a long while suddenly said, "Xiao Hui, let's go." Xiao Hui crouched on his shoulder, scratched its head with its monkey claws, and called out twice. Ghostly smiled. The soul-devouring light lit up. One man and one monkey blended into the dark green light, soared into the air, and rushed into the huge miasma. Entering the miasma, instantly the surrounding lights all disappeared. The originally bright sky disappeared without a trace, leaving only a vast expanse of gray miasma. As far as one's eyes could see, one could not see further than half a zhang. Almost at the same time, Ghostly entered the miasma. The soul-devouring dark green light shone brightly, surged up from below, forming a light circle, firmly protecting Ghostly and Xiao Hui. The surrounding miasma surged incessantly, but could not invade this light circle. Looking out from the inside, following Ghostly's flight, the surrounding miasma like clouds and mist, separated from the front and gathered behind, above and below. It was all this gray miasma. This flight actually flew for a long time. Ghostly's expression gradually turned solemn. This extremely poisonous miasma wall was the most obvious dividing line between the outer and inner marsh. The outer marsh, although the outer marsh was filled with bottomless pits, but if one was careful, it would not be a big problem. But in this inner marsh, not to mention other things, just this miasma was extremely poisonous. Ordinary people who came into contact with it, not to mention inhaling, even if they held their breath, but as long as their skin came into contact with this level of poison, in a short period of time, the poison would invade into their body, attacking their heart and killing them. Although Ghostly's skills had reached a great level and was far from that little disciple on Qingyun Hill, but he still did not dare to let his guard down against this level of poison. Inside the Death Marsh, there were dangers everywhere, especially this inner marsh. It was an ancient savage land, dangerous and unpredictable. Immediately, he raised his utmost caution and carefully advanced. Just that this miasma wall was extremely thick. After flying for a while, they were still inside. The surroundings were even more gray. Ghostly was secretly shocked. According to his own calculations, he had already flown at least 100 zhongs or so. Could it be that in this savage land, the miasma had not dispersed since ancient times? Some rare treasure would be born here. Most likely no one would even know for thousands of years, not to mention obtaining it. While he was thinking like that in his heart, but the soul-devouring light was getting brighter and brighter. The surrounding gray miasma surged incessantly, as if its speed was also faintly increasing. Suddenly, Ghost Lee's heart jumped deep into miasma ahead. A blue light suddenly flashed past, but dissipated after a flash. That color was faint, but for some reason, it looked familiar. Almost at the same time, the surrounding miasma, which was quietly surging, suddenly increased in speed, like boiling water in a pot, suddenly boiled. Up, down, left and right, the gray miasma started to spin crazily. Numerous big and small miasma vortexes suddenly appeared ahead. Indistinctly, there was a suction force, attacking Ghost Lee from all directions. Xiao Hui on Ghost Lee's shoulder did not dare move, its mouth softly, tightly clutching onto Ghost Lee's clothes. Ghost Lee's face was as calm as water, but his brows were already frowning deeply. Suddenly he snorted. In the soul-devouring green light, a golden light abruptly soared, together with the green light. Immediately the surrounding miasma was forced back a few notches. And at the same time, the soul-devouring light broke through the air, as if it completely disregarded the danger ahead, charged into the largest miasma vortex ahead. Once the figure entered that enormous miasma vortex, immediately he felt the suction force increase sharply. Violent winds howled, gushing in from all directions. It was all highly toxic miasma. Ghost Lee's face turned pale. He was actually pulled up by this enormous natural force, flew straight up to the sky. The next moment, the biting cold wind sounds incessantly, churning the clouds like an enraged wind god's roar. Ghostly in the midair took a deep breath. Suddenly both of his hands reached out, left hand forming a seal, right hand gestures, golden and green energies rose up at the same time, flashed again and again, swiftly fused into one. If a good faction expert was here, most likely he would be shocked speechless. Qing Yun Sek Tai Ji Xin Qing Wei and Tian Yin Temple, great Brahmin wisdom. In this young man's body, perfectly fused into one. In the brilliant golden and green light, the soul-devouring light immediately stabilized, no longer drifted with the wind, forcibly stopped in this storm. Ghostly observed intently, but the storm was getting more and more violent. The clouds surged angrily. His vision did not go far. Everywhere was gray. Ghostly hesitated for a moment. In the end, he knew that this was a dangerous place, and he really could not stay for long. Immediately urged the soul-devouring stick and charged towards the violent whirling storm. In that instant, his eyes and ears were ringing violently. The sky and earth were spinning and spinning. Finally, he still charged out of the eye of the storm, which was hidden in the calm exterior miasma. The force of his dash was not a small matter. After leaving the miasma vortex, he still charged forward for a long distance. Just that because of the disturbance just now, the sky and earth were spinning. And right now, although the surrounding miasma gradually calmed down, but Ghost Lee's brows were still frowning. He did not know if he had gone in the wrong direction. While he was contemplating, suddenly Xiao Hui on his shoulder suddenly screamed out a warning. Ghostly was shocked and did not have time to look carefully. Almost subconsciously, he shifted his body 3 chi to the side. Oh! In the gray clouds, a black and enormous object rumbled past, swept past the place where he was just standing. A pungent stench assaulted his nostrils. Even the soul-devouring light circle could not completely block it, indistinctly penetrated in. Just that after a moment, this unparalleled strange object again disappeared in the miasma. Ghostly was stunned. His heart suddenly pounded violently. This enormous object that appeared in an instant seemed to give him a head-on blow. The next moment, ignoring Xiao Hui's cries, disregarding the danger, he chased after it. Just that monster disappeared in a flash. Although its body was unbelievably huge, but its speed was not slow. In addition, with this thick miasma wall, his vision could not see more than half a zhong. After a moment, he could not see that monster anymore. Chapter 181. Ghostly frowned and slowly stopped. Just as he was concentrating, Suddenly there was a cry of alarm in front of him, followed by shouts from all directions. There were actually a number of people in front of him. Presumably the monster had passed by and immediately scared everyone away. Ghostly was startled and flew up. The clouds in front of him were rolling and rolling. Suddenly an angry shout was heard ahead. The voice was clear and cold. "Evildoer!" Before the words were finished, a swift and fierce blue light abruptly came from the side, piercing towards his chest, like a rainbow crossing the horizon. In that instant, the surrounding miasma also turned into a sheet of brilliant blue. Ghostly was shocked. This person's sword skills were ferocious, pressing forward with an indomitable will, without mercy. Just this sword skill alone was high and could not be underestimated. At the critical moment, his body did not slow down, but instead sped up in an instant like lightning, charged up to the sky, trying to shake off the sword behind him and then counterattack. Unexpectedly, that person in the clouds was not to be underestimated. Right now, both of them were separated by the miasma, unable to see each other clearly, but just based on the reaction from the sword, that blue light, as if it had spirituality, as fast as lightning, like it was attached to his bones, the distance between the two did not decrease. The next moment, the nearby miasma immediately rolled away, Ghostly transformed into a faint green light, a blue light behind him, both of them ascending to the sky and descending to the ground, changing positions like lightning in the layers of poisonous miasma, chasing relentlessly. Wherever they passed, the clouds evaporated. In the pursuit, Ghostly frowned tightly. The person behind him was highly skilled. In such a hurry, he could not see what magical weapon she was using, but that murderous aura was unmistakable. Definitely not someone of the same faction. Most likely someone from the good faction, sworn to be irreconcilable with him. Under the good faction, which powerful figure was it? His mind had just moved, but his hands had already started to counterattack. If this continued, naturally the person behind him would be fine, but he himself would be like a headless fly running around. Who knew what other strange things would happen? The green light suddenly flourished. Ghostly's body suddenly soared up, turned back in midair. The soul-absorbing, indistinct sword, placed horizontally across his chest. That blue sword light behind him seemed to sense something. The sword light expanded, its force even fiercer, heading toward his chest. Ghostly grabbed the soul-absorbing sword in front of him. That green pearl on the black stick immediately shone brightly, especially under the light. Streaks of blood-red threads also seemed to light up at the same time, red blood quietly flowing, red light and green light, indistinctly dim, facing that blue sword light, met it head-on. Rumble! Ghostly's body shook greatly. His entire body involuntarily retreated 10 jongs, but that blue sword light in front of him was also sent flying. Someone in the cloud snorted. Clearly he was not feeling well either. For the past few years, Ghostly had been practicing evil Wei Tian Shu day and night. In addition, with the sinister ore by his side, his ruthless character had long become heavy. Right now, without a word, he flew straight ahead, the soul-absorbing stick breaking through the air. Unexpectedly, the soul-absorbing had just... The clouds abruptly parted. The soul-absorbing sword was also the soul-absorbing sword. Ghostly, with a shrill cry, maneuvered his magical weapon and immediately clashed with that blue sword light. Right now, the soul-absorbing sword and that blue light had already clashed, but the clouds churned. Ghostly's naked eyes could not see the magical weapon clearly. He had to rely on himself and the soul-absorbing sword to control it. This sudden battle to both parties was extremely dangerous. Both of them were highly skilled figures. If one was not careful, even if they did not die under the other party's hands, if they were distracted and injured, they would be invaded by the surrounding poisonous miasma. It would be a situation of certain death. The person in front clearly did not expect to encounter such a person. However, she was shrouded in the mist, and her expression could not be seen clearly. However, looking at the momentum of her sword, she was not willing to give in at all. Just in this split second, the soul-devouring stick and the blue sword light violently collided in the miasma, rumbling loud noises. With these two magical weapons as the center, the miasma rolled, indistinctly forming a huge vortex. Even though they were separated by a great distance, but the soul-absorbing sword and Ghostly were blood-refined objects. Their connection was like flesh and blood. Ghostly felt that the cold feeling on the soul-absorbing sword gradually boiled, as if this magical weapon itself had spirituality and was excited. This feeling was really strange. Ever since he mastered his skills, it had never happened again. Just that a long time ago, when he was still an ignorant youth, this feeling, he had once felt it. His heart was suddenly shocked, as if indistinctly something churned in his heart. The soul-absorbing sword and that blue sword light clashed violently for the last time, flew back. Right now, the surrounding vortex was getting bigger and bigger. Ghostly and that person's battle had already reached the most intense moment. Both of them were separated by the miasma, only relying on each other's spiritual sense. On one hand, they had to guard against the opponent's attack. On the other hand, they had to defend against the surrounding poisonous miasma in this kind of dangerous place. Obviously, the sooner the battle ended, the better. The surrounding vortex shook violently. At the same time, numerous small miasma vortexes appeared, but Ghostly's eyes were still staring ahead. Behind that thick miasma, indistinct blue light, he could even feel that person's murderous gaze. Suddenly, a clear whistle. The blue sword light pierced the air with a sharp whistle, instantly pierced through the clouds, forming an enormous light pillar, striking down from above. Ghostly did not make any attempt to evade, flew straight up, forcibly breaking into the blue light, straight towards that person. That person in the clouds shouted angrily. The blue light surged. Instantly, all the lights retracted back into that cloud layer. The next moment, it congealed into a brilliant sky blue celestial sword, with an unstoppable force charged over. Almost at the same time, the soul-absorbing green light shone, instantly forced back the surrounding miasma, met it head-on. A strike of life and death at this moment. That person held the sword hilt. Ghostly held the soul-absorbing stick tightly, charged forward. Two sharp lights instantly forced the surrounding miasma to disperse, as if holding their breath, waiting for the moment of life and death to be decided. Her fair hand gripped the hilt of her sword. Her clothes fluttered in the wind. She was like a fairy from the 9 heavens. Her peerless beauty appeared on the other side of the clouds at the moment when the mist dispersed. Lusweki. Many years later, the moment they met again, what kind of gaze staring at each other, even if it was only for a moment. Suddenly, the entire world seemed to suddenly stop. The gray miasma was forced back by the supreme magical weapons, slowly revealing that man's figure. That man who was deeply engraved in Yu Yu's heart was right in front. Her entire body did not move. Only her heart trembled slightly. Two magical weapons like lightning, like light, like mortal enemies entangled for 3 lifetimes and 7 lifetimes, pressing closer. Was it hate? Was it love? Was it going to be decided in this instant? You die, I live? That moment was right in front of her. That moment in a breath's time. What was it faster than this lightning? What was it quietly lingering in her heart? Was it the intention? The soul-absorbing stick, which was glowing brightly, suddenly tilted slightly, evaded. Ghostly's chest suddenly opened up. Xiao Hui on his shoulder screamed. Blue lights like stars gushed over, but he did not feel any pain, brushed past his side, as if in the unseen world there was some kind of reaction. Tianya, celestial sword, also slightly tilted to the other side. This moment, it was really a great danger. Ghostly or Lusweki, whoever was slower or hesitated for a moment, would immediately be able to kill the other party under the magical weapons. Just that, they actually gave up for no reason. That moment when they brushed past each other, he still looked deeply. In that beautiful girl's deep eyes, what was actually reflected was a shadow. The next moment, because the two of them were preparing for a life and death battle, was too strong. They each flew out in different directions, separated far away. In the air, on the clothes, indistinctly, was it her faint fragrance? The sky suddenly brightened. Ghostly abruptly regained his senses. A stretch of boundless dense forest appeared below his feet. He was falling down, and the sky was gloomy, dark clouds moving. Unknowingly, he had already broken through that unbelievably thick layer of miasma. and finally arrive at the extremely dangerous inner marsh. In the mid-air, he stabilized his body, slowly landed, suddenly turned his head, that enormous miasmal wall, as if it had not changed since ancient times, towering there. Not to mention, where would that girl be now? Chapter 182. Great Wong Village. Xiao Huan stood at the village entrance and looked worriedly towards the Death Marsh. In the direction of the Death Marsh, the clear sky in the morning had gradually darkened, and it looked like another heavy rain was coming. Last night, she and her grandfather Tannis were still in the Death Marsh with Jean Pinger and the rest, but when Jean Pinger came back, she looked very tired and sent both of them out of the Death Marsh overnight. Xiao Huan privately asked Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger kept silent and only said, "The situation in this Death Marsh now is far more dangerous than I expected. If you all continue to stay here, I'm afraid you will be harming yourselves instead." Xiao Huan had always believed this sister's words and left the Death Marsh with Tannis that night. At the same time, following Jean Pinger's instructions, they prepared a little today and were going to leave this place. Just that, she had known Jean Pinger for quite some time, but last night was the first time she saw Jean Pinger's expression so grave. She pondered and couldn't help but started to worry for this sister. "Xiao Huan." A familiar call was heard from behind. Xiao Huan turned around, and, as expected, it was Tannis walking over with quick steps. He said, "Everything is packed, let's go." Xiao Huan silently nodded, but couldn't help but ask Tannis "Grandfather, in the Death Marsh, do you think Jean Pinger's sister will be in danger?" Tannis was stunned for a moment and snappily said, "How would I know?" Xiao Huan pursed her lips and glared at him. Tannis after all, still doted on this granddaughter. He sighed, looked around, and saw that there was no one around, walked to Xiao Huan, and quietly said, "These few days in the Death Marsh, we followed Jean Pinger and met Changshan Hall people a few times, but after last night, did you see any more Changshan Hall disciples?" Xiao Huan was surprised. Tannis smiled. His face gradually revealed a different expression from his usual cheeky smile. His eyes gradually sharpened and brightened. He said, "Especially that day when you met that fish-headed strange man. I heard clearly at the side that the people who met with Jean Pinger were the other two big evil sects, Ghost King sect, and one Du Clan's young experts, Ghost Li and Qin Wuyen. These three people at this time, and also in Changshan Hall headquarters territory. What do you think they will do?" Xiao Huan frowned. After a long while, she suddenly cried out, "Grandpa, don't tell me you were seeing..." Zhou Yixian interrupted. "That's right. I'm afraid the once glorious Changshan Hall for the past 800 years was actually destroyed in the hands of these three young fiends. With Yu Yangzi's level of cultivation, he suddenly heaved a long sigh. His expression suddenly turned bleak. After a moment of silence, he said, "Now the evil faction's internal strife is getting more and more intense. The good faction is also scheming and plotting against each other. Qin Yun's sect 10 years ago suffered a great loss. Until now, it has not recovered. I'm afraid the world will be plunged into misery and suffering again." Tani was in a daze. Tannis let out a long breath, suddenly pulled himself together, laughed, and said, "If the world wants to be in chaos, then let it be. What does it have to do with us? Let's go and continue to benefit the common people of the world." Tani was speechless, but Tannis did not seem to mind at all. He walked over and picked up the bundle, his hand holding the bamboo pole with "Immortal guides the way," turned around, and was about to call out to Tani when suddenly he was stunned. His eyes looked behind Tani. Tani saw her grandpa's strange gaze and quickly turned to look. She couldn't help but was also stunned. Wild Dog Taoist's face was full of misfortune, his face gloomy as he walked over from the direction of the Death Marsh. His eyes swept and saw Tani and Tannis standing at the village entrance. Early this morning, Wild Dog Taoist, who had been following Ghostly, was suddenly ordered to leave the Death Marsh. Wild Dog was stunned, but in his heart he knew indistinctly that the Death Marsh was extremely dangerous and there were benefits in leaving. Just that Ghostly, that young man with a straight face, coldly said a few words to him. He was extremely displeased, and on the way, he swore and walked out angrily. Now that he suddenly met Tani at the village entrance, Wild Dog, for some reason, his heart jumped and subconsciously moved to the side. He did not know what he was afraid of. Unexpectedly, before he took 2 steps, Tani's voice was heard from behind. "Priest, wait a minute." Wild Dog was startled, slowly turned around. Taniska frowned and walked to Tani, snappily said, "What are you calling him for?" Tani glared at Taniska and ignored him. A smile appeared on her face. She walked over and took out an umbrella from the bundle beside her, said to Wild Dog Taoist, "Priest, I have not returned your umbrella to you." Wild Dog glanced at the umbrella, his face uncertain. For a moment he was in a trance and did not stretch out his hand to take it. Tani did not mind, stuffed the umbrella into Wild Dog Taoist's hand, smiled sweetly at him, and said thank you for that day. Wild Dog Taoist suddenly felt his eyes brightening, seemed to be dazzled, secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Tani walked back to Taniska, took the bundle from his hand, said, "Let's go, Grandpa." Taniska stared at Wild Dog, who was standing dumbfounded at the same spot, followed Tani, said, "Why are you smiling at him?" Tani said, "Grandpa, he is a good person." Taniska spat, said, "He is a good person. Am I not the reincarnation of Buddha?" Tani and Taniska's figures gradually went further away. Their voices also became softer. Wild Dog stood at his spot, holding the umbrella in his hand, motionless, not knowing how long. Suddenly he stomped and walked in big strides, towards the direction where Tani and Taniska went. After their figures disappeared one by one, Great King Village regained its peace. At a corner several zhongs away from the village entrance stood a man and a woman, the man in white, the woman in black veil. It was Qing Long and Yuji. Qing Long indifferently said, "What is this Taniska's background? Do you know?" Yuji, who was hiding behind the black veil, did not speak. Only saw the black veil, gently swaying, seemed to shake her head. Qing Long pondered for a moment. His eyes seemed to be deep in thought, then said, "This person is not simple, and his granddaughter is actually in contact with Hehuan's sect, Jean Pinger. We need to pay more attention in the future." Yuji was silent for a moment, faintly said, "Let's go. The important matter that our sect head ordered us to do cannot be delayed." Qing Long glanced at her. A faint trace of worry flashed past his eyes, but his expression did not change, said, "That's right, let's go." After speaking, both of them unhurriedly walked out of Great King Village. But the direction they were walking in was the opposite direction of Taniska and the rest, heading towards the Death Marsh. A wind blew from somewhere, brushed past heaven and earth, indistinctly carrying a sense of desolation. The sky seemed to darken a few degrees. Rumble. A sound of thunder was heard in the dark clouds. Bean-sized raindrops immediately started to fall, drenching the entire heaven and earth. A stretch of dusky. Ghostly stood on top of a big tree, raised his eyes, and looked around. Behind him was still that gigantic miasma wall. Actually, according to common sense, once the miasma of the ordinary evil waters in the mountains met with rain, it would usually restrain itself, but this poisonous miasma in the Death Marsh seemed to not fear the rain at all. No matter how much the wind and rain battered, it still towered and did not budge. Ghostly unhurriedly turned his head and looked ahead. In this inner marsh, unexpectedly, there was a dense forest growing. At a glance, in the bleak wind and bitter rain, this forest also extended endlessly, not knowing how big it was. And the rain was rather heavy, although the vision was much clearer than before in the miasma, but he still could not see too far. Ji. Suddenly, the branches beside him jumped a few times. It was Xiao Hui who had left just now, bouncing on the branches and ran back. In a few leaps it jumped back to Ghostly's shoulder. In its hands there were a few wild fruits plucked from somewhere. It grinned and passed one to Ghostly. It held 3 to 4 wild fruits in its hands, opened its mouth and chewed. Ghostly smiled, received it, and took a bite. He felt that it was green and astringent, but had a different kind of sweetness. By now the rain was getting heavier. The thunder was incessant. Ghostly did not use his magical weapon to block, and allowed the rain to fall on his body. Xiao Hui sat on Ghostly's shoulder, its fur gradually becoming wet, but it did not seem to mind, only cared about the fruits in its mouth. Chi eating happily, its long tail stretched out and swayed behind Ghostly, stretched out and swayed. It looked rather interesting. Ghostly slowly ate the wild fruit in his hand, suddenly softly said, Xiao Hui, just now you also recognized her, right? Xiao Hui's mouth was still chewing on the wild fruit. It mumbled indistinctly. A pair of monkey eyes darted a few glances at Ghostly. Ghostly also did not seem to think that he could get any answers from a monkey. He only muttered to himself, "Why didn't she kill me? Didn't she always hate the evil sect the most?" Rumble. Xiao Hui did not reply. A sudden clap of thunder sounded in the sky instead. Ghostly slowly looked up at the sky full of rain like knives or swords, turned into thousands, pouring down. His body slightly trembled. Suddenly his mind wandered. It was as if he had returned to that night when he was still a teenager, when he and that kind-looking old monk were outside the village. The monk calmly spoke to him. This scene was engraved deep in his heart. Even after so many years, it had never faded from his mind. His hands clenched tightly, his nails dug deep into his palms. Even his body started to tremble from agitation. Right now, the soul-absorbing orb nestled in his sleeve. As usual, almost at the same time, lit up. The familiar cold feeling spread throughout his body. The vicious energy on the sinister orb seemed to congeal little by little in his eyes. Xiao Hui on his shoulder called out uneasily. In the sky, a bolt of lightning abruptly pierced through the sky. Ghostly, with a shrill cry, leapt up. His entire body glowed with red light in the midair. His right arm stretched out. The soul-absorbing orb was already in his hand. The dark green light in the rain condensed into an enormous light, with a loud bang chopped down. His eyes right now were already filled with blood-red light, his face full of murderous intent, his face twisted, his mouth growling like a wild beast. This enormous green light abruptly chopped down. That big tree that was still standing just now was forcibly chopped into two from the middle, collapsed to both sides with a loud bang. Rumble. In the horizon, another thunderclap sounded. Xiao Hui jumped to one side, quietly watched him. Ghostly knelt on one leg in the filthy soil soaked in the rain, his right hand tightly holding the soul-absorbing orb, his entire body trembling, a fierce glint flashing in his eyes, his face filled with pain. Who knew? The pain he was in, a gush of peaceful, positive yang energy in his body, rose faintly. On his clothes that were drenched by the rain, at his right arm, suddenly another circular faint light shone. This wave of positive yang energy was extremely pure, transmitted from the inferno mirror tied to his right arm, and then entered his body, gradually resisting the sinister orb's vicious energy. After a long time, the blood-red light in his eyes slowly disappeared. His face also calmed down, and at the same time, the brilliant lights from the soul-absorbing orb and the inferno mirror also gradually weakened and finally disappeared. Ghostly, as if he had gone through a great battle, slowly stood up, his expression tired. For the past 10 years, he had been practicing evil way Tian Shu day and night. The sinister orb's innate, vicious energy was even more immersed day and night. Not knowing how many times he had been controlled by the sinister orb's evil energy like today. But firstly, he still had Tai Ji, Xianxing Wei, and great Brahmin wisdom in his body. Both were good faction supreme cultivation ways. Only then he could barely withstand it. Chapter 183. But the most crucial thing was, every time his consciousness was about to disperse, the other mysterious magical weapon on him, the Inferno Mirror, would always emit a magical and pure strong yang energy, pulling him back from completely sinking into the path of the evil and murderous path. Just that he himself also did not know how long he could resist this natural evil sinister orb, and to him, every time he thought of the past, thinking of Bai Yao, the kind of torment most likely would be even more unbearable. If not for his incomparable perseverance, most likely he would have long gone crazy. And these things, even the shrewd Ghost King did not notice, completely unaware that his most capable subordinate was on the edge of insanity day and night. He slowly stood up, opened his mouth, and then realized his own voice was already hoarse. Xiao Hui, let's go. Xiao Hui blinked its eyes, obediently jumped back. In a few leaps, it jumped onto his shoulder. Ghostly gently stroked Xiao Hui's fur. His lips moved, but in the end he did not say anything. Inhaled deeply, strided forward, walked towards the depths of the forest ahead. In the death marsh, which was shrouded by the drizzle, other than the sound of the wind and rain, nothing else seemed to be heard between heaven and earth. The ancient and dense forest was silent, the rain beating on the branches and leaves, water droplets sliding down. In the horizon, another clap of thunder. This rain had been pouring for an hour, and it still did not look like it would stop. Lin Jingyu wiped his face, wiped away the water droplets, but in a short while another wave of rain came down. He smiled bitterly, gave up the effort. He was in the ancient forest, front, back, left, and right. There was only his figure. Alone in this wild, dangerous, and unfamiliar place, there was really an inexplicable sense of fear. Originally Qing Yun's sect and good faction Tianyin Temple, Funxiang Valley group of outstanding young experts entered the inner marsh together. But when they passed through the wall of miasma, they encountered the strange eye of the storm in the middle, which threw them into chaos. But before they could calm down, an incomparably huge monster suddenly appeared in the miasma and passed through them. Because the monster was covered by the miasma, no one could see its appearance clearly, and the monster seemed to be just passing by. It did not do anything to harm them, but its body was really too big, although everyone's cultivation was high. But in the danger, everyone flew away in panic. In addition to the miasma storm, they actually got separated. Lin Jingyu flew all the way, relying on the protection of the Dragon Slayer's sword. He rushed out of the miasma and also came to this ancient inner swamp forest. And the place he charged out from was actually just a short distance of 10 miles from where Ghostly was. These two childhood friends, who were once as close as brothers, were completely unaware of this situation. However, even if they knew, wouldn't they be facing an even more painful scene? Lin Jingyu naturally did not know all these. He looked up at the sky. The dark clouds were still thick. It seemed like this rain would still continue for another half a day. He couldn't help but quietly cursed a few times. After a moment of contemplation, eventually still strided forward. Traversing through the forest, there was actually no path to speak of other than those tall trees. The forest was also densely packed in lush thistles and thorns, all kinds of strange flowers and plants, strange beasts, and poisonous insects that had never appeared in the world outside the Death Marsh, appeared before Lin Jingyu from time to time. Just after a short while, Lin Jingyu had already met with danger several times, if not for his intelligence and alertness, and the fact that his cultivation had increased a lot in these 10 years, he would have suffered greatly. Woo! A sound, the Dragon Slayer's sword drew out a jade green light, cut a red poisonous snake that pounced over from a nearby tree branch into two. At the same time, Lin Jingyu finally could not take it anymore, immediately soared up, borrowing the power of his magical weapon, soared into the air. In the air, he then felt slightly relieved. At the same time, he was also secretly shocked. In this inner marsh, it was really one step and 3 shocks. The danger far surpassed the outer marsh. Really did not know where did these many strange poisonous insects come from. He glanced at the ground. The red poisonous snake was still struggling and twisting on the ground. It looked like it was still alive. Apart from this poisonous snake, he had also been attacked by a poisonous scorpion, a toad, and a mutated lizard. Danger lurked in every corner. Originally, Lin Jingyu thought that he did not need to waste his energy and just walk for a while, but now no matter what, he did not dare to easily land on the ground. He looked around in midair, and his body suddenly shook. Deep in the forest ahead, behind the sky full of rain, suddenly a golden light flashed past. In the wind and rain, indistinctly there was someone shouting. Lin Jingyu was delighted. Without hesitation, quickly activated his magical weapon and flew towards that golden light. His magical weapon flying in the air. How fast was his speed? In a short while, he had already flown near, focused his eyes, and looked, could not help but was shocked. In this forest, there was a huge empty space, but in a puddle in the middle, an extremely strange flower was blooming. This flower was extremely huge, its diameter several zhongs. If not for seeing it with his own eyes, it was really hard to believe that there was such a strange species in this world. Looking down from the air, The lower part of the flower was green, the upper part instead divided into numerous branches, bright red. In the middle, the red and green colors were clearly distinguished. Obviously, a dividing line could be seen. And at the end of those red branches, there were dew-like, sparkling, and translucent small balls, the top dripping with water, not knowing if it was because of the rain or it was originally like that. Note 1. In this wind and rain, this strange flower swayed with the wind. Indistinctly, a faint, sweet fragrance spread in the wind. While Lin Jingyu was stunned, his attention was attracted by the two people and one beast beside this strange flower. One look, and immediately his face lit up. The two people standing in the middle were his sect return of the Wind Valley Xingshushu and Tianyin Temple Efeixiang. Meeting familiar people in this unfamiliar place, Lin Jingyu was extremely delighted and could not help but called out. The two of them suddenly heard the call and were shocked, turned around, and saw Lin Jingyu dashing down. Both were overjoyed, but after a moment, Xingshushu pointed Lin Jingyu to look ahead. Lin Jingyu calmed his mind and immediately was startled by that strange creature in front of him. Originally, the strange creature confronting Efeixiang and Xingshushu was also extremely strange, but firstly, Lin Jingyu was stunned by the huge, strange flower in front of them, and secondly, he was too happy to see them and did not notice the strange creature in front of him. Looking at it now, the strange creature looked like a duck and was actually as tall as a human. Its body was green, light red eyes, red tail, fangs in its mouth, and a pair of wings on its back. It looked like a ferocious bird, note 2. Right now, the strange creature was seen growling in a low voice. Both of its wings flapped, and immediately a gust of wind mixed with the rain pounced over. Lin Jingyu landed beside Xingshushu and Efeixiang. The three of them were leaning against the strange flower. Lin Jingyu frowned and took a step back. Unexpectedly, Efeixiang's expression suddenly changed. He quickly stretched out his hand from the side to pull Lin Jingyu and quietly said, "You must not go near that flower." Lin Jingyu was stunned and stopped, but he glanced at Efeixiang. The smile on his face suddenly turned cold and indifferently blocked Efeixiang's hand. Efeixiang frowned, sighed, and withdrew his hand. He knew that Lin Jingyu still remembered that tragedy at Grass Temple Village and could not let it go. Right now, Xingshushu suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "Be careful!" Both of them were shocked and looked ahead. As expected, the strange creature flapped its wings, leaped into the air, and charged over. Xingshushu anxiously said, "Efeixiang's senior brother, we will act according to plan." Lin Jingyu originally wanted to make a move, but after hearing what he said, he could not help but was startled and stopped. The strange creature's momentum was fierce and fast. In a blink, it was already before them. Efeixiang and Xingshushu suddenly gave a low shout at the same time and separated to two sides. That strange creature looked ferocious, but its brain seemed to be dull. For a moment, it was still in a daze, as if it could not decide which enemy to chase. But at this moment, Efeixiang's reincarnation pearl and Xingshushu's Xinyuan sword struck at it from the side at the same time. That strange creature did not seem to be afraid, opened its mouth and roared. Two sounds, the two magical weapons hit the monster, but only made it fly backwards. But looking at the monster in the air, bearing its fangs and brandishing its claws, it did not seem to be injured at all. This endurance even made Lin Jingyu's countenance change. If it was him, most likely he might not be able to take Xingshushu and Efeixiang's full force attack. That strange creature flapped its wings. Once it stabilized its body, it would counterattack ferociously. Lin Jingyu concentrated and prepared, but at this moment, his entire body shook, slightly opened his mouth, unable to speak. That strange creature flew backwards. There was nothing behind it. It was that huge, strange flower. The strange creature's body flew. In the air touched the red crystal branches above the flower. Suddenly, that strange creature roared, but its voice was filled with terror. In a moment, this strange flower had undergone a tremendous change. All of the flowers seemed to come alive. From all directions surrounded the strange creature, and the red crystal balls on the flower branches seemed to have a strong stickiness. That strange creature stuck to it. Although it struggled, but it could not break free. In a short while, More and more petals surrounded it layer by layer, finally wrapping this strange creature. Even the monster's roar gradually quietened down. Fa Xiong and Zheng Shu, who set this trap, saw this strange flower was so terrifying, could not help but like Lin Jingyu, their countenances changed. After a long time, that strange flower finally wrapped the strange creature completely. The monster could no longer be seen. The scene suddenly returned to tranquility. Only the sound of wind and rain was left between heaven and earth. The three of them looked at each other. Fa Xiong sighed, one palm erect, his mouth softly chanted. Note 1. Divine and Evil E. Hunter Herbs Chapter, Man-Eater Flower. Wild species, flowers more than 10 zhongs, red at the top and white at the bottom, red beads at the top, sticks to living creatures and devours them. Another note. Modern Carnivorous Plants Encyclopedia. This creature is suspected to be a Utricularia genus organism. South America, Asia, North America not clear. Seems to be distributed everywhere, but its size is not big. Insectivorous, not much harm to humans. Its appearance is similar to the ancient book, maybe aquatic Utricularia, may also be Drosera. Note 2. This creature is from Classic of Mountains and Seas, Classic of Mountains 5th volume, Classic of Zhongshan, Qingyao Mountain. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.